6 years. 6 years of silence, of grief swallowed whole, of a man convincing himself he had made peace with losing her. Then one morning in a hospital lobby, Kang Tae-jin looked up, and the entire architecture of his life cracked down the middle. Because standing 20 feet away was Amani Brooks, and beside her was a little boy wearing a silver phoenix necklace. And that little boy turned and smiled, and Tae-jin saw his own face staring back at him from a child he never knew existed. If you've ever been lied to by someone you trusted with everything, stay until the end. Drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story has traveled. Like and follow so you don't miss what happens next. Cabbed. But the morning started like every other morning Kang Tae-jin had survived in the last 6 years, with discipline rather than joy. He was awake before the alarm. He always was. There was something in his body that refused real sleep anymore. Some wire pulled permanently taut, somewhere between his chest and his spine, that would not allow the kind of deep, boneless rest that other men seemed to fall into without effort. He lay in the dark of his penthouse bedroom on the 43rd floor of the Hanseong Tower and stared at the ceiling and breathed, the way his old martial arts instructor had once taught him to breathe when pain needed managing. Slow, deliberate, controlled. Control was the thing he'd built his entire life around after she left. He didn't say her name, even to himself. He had trained himself out of that years ago. There was a locked room in his mind where everything connected to that time lived. Her voice, the way she smelled of antiseptic and orange blossom, the sound of her laugh in the dark, and the door to that room stayed sealed. A man who led the Kong Syndicate could not afford to have an open wound walking around inside him. His enemies would find it. They always found it. He dressed without music, black trousers, white shirt, a charcoal suit jacket. He checked his phone. 14 messages, 2 of which were flagged urgent by his head of security, Min Dong-hyun. He answered none of them yet. He went to the window first and looked out at Seoul spreading itself across the valley below, gray and gold in the early light, and he permitted himself exactly 60 seconds to be something other than the boss. Then the 60 seconds ended. He picked up his phone and walked out the door. The car was waiting in the underground garage, Dong-hyun already in the front passenger seat, a second man behind the wheel. Tae-jin got in the back without looking at either of them. "Status," he said. Dong-hyun turned slightly. He was a compact, flat-faced man who had been with the Kong family since Tae-jin's father ran the organization. He was loyal in the way old furniture was loyal, tested, battered, and still holding weight. "The Hanseong Medical Center at 9, your father's therapy evaluation." Tae-jin looked out the window. "And the park situation?" "Moving, Jun Seok's team confirmed the shipment cleared customs without inspection. We're clean." "Good. There's also a message from Mr. Choi. He wants a briefing before the week's end." Something small and cold passed through Tae-jin's chest. It always did these days when Choi's name came up. He couldn't explain it. Not to Dong-hyun, not to himself. It was instinct, maybe. The kind of instinct you developed when you'd spent 20 years reading rooms full of dangerous people. A shift in the air around a name. "Tell him Thursday," Tae-jin said. Dong-hyun nodded and said nothing more. That was his value. He understood when conversation was finished. The car moved through morning traffic, Seoul waking up around it, and Kang Tae-jin rode in silence toward his father's hospital. Teams. Hanseong Medical Center was the best private hospital in the country. Tae-jin's family paid for the entire 4th-floor rehabilitation wing, which meant Chairman Kang Sung-ho occupied a corner suite overlooking a garden courtyard, attended by 3 dedicated nurses and a rotating team of physical therapists who spoke to the old man with the careful deference one extended to someone who had once been capable of making serious trouble. He was still capable of it, in Tae-jin's opinion. The stroke 18 months ago had taken the left side of his father's mobility and thinned his voice to something rawer and slower than it had been. But the chairman's eyes had not changed. They were the same dense black they had always been, calculating, unsentimental, quick to notice the things people tried to hide. Age had not softened them. If anything, the hospital bed had given them a particular quality of patience that was almost worse. Tae-jin rode the elevator to the 4th floor with his hands loose at his sides and his face blank. This was a performance he gave every visit. A son coming to see his father, uncomplicated, dutiful. The performance was mostly true, which was the thing that made it sustainable. He did love the old man, in the undemonstrative, thorny way that Kang men had always loved their families. He simply didn't know what to do with that love on most mornings. The elevator opened. The lobby of the rehabilitation wing was wide and quietly lit, with a reception desk to the left and a seating area ahead that faced a bank of large windows looking out to the courtyard garden. There were a few people in the seating area, a middle-aged woman reading something on her phone, an elderly man asleep in a wheelchair, a child crouched near the window pressing both palms flat against the glass, watching something outside in the garden. Taejin's gaze moved across the lobby automatically, the way it always did. Threat assessment, habit, as involuntary as blinking, and that was when he stopped walking. She was at the reception desk. Her back was to him. She was speaking to the woman behind the counter, handing over what appeared to be a medical visitor's badge, and he couldn't see her face. But he didn't need to see her face. He had spent 6 years excavating every memory of her from his mind, burying them one by one, and some stubborn part of him had apparently refused to bury it all. The specific angle of her shoulders, the particular way she stood with her weight slightly shifted to her left hip, the way her hands moved when she spoke, precise and expressive at once. His body knew before his mind confirmed it. His body had stopped walking entirely without his permission. Then she turned to collect her badge from the counter, and he saw her face in profile, and the confirmation hit him like something physical. Not a blow exactly, more like the moment after a blow, when the pain arrives half a second after the impact and takes your breath with it. Imani Brooks. She looked almost the same. 6 years showed in small ways. A stillness in her that hadn't been there before, the kind of stillness that came from carrying weight for a long time. She was dressed simply, professional, dark scrubs under an open cardigan, a stethoscope looped around her neck. She had her hospital ID clipped to her lapel. Her hair was pulled back. She was exactly who she had always been, and she was standing 10 feet away from him in the lobby of his father's hospital. And Kang Tae-jin stood there like a man whose legs had simply forgotten what they were for. She turned away from the counter without looking in his direction. She called toward the window. "Malik, baby, come on. We're going up." And the child at the glass turned around. The boy was 5, maybe 6. He was wearing a dinosaur print shirt and small blue sneakers, and he bounced away from the window with the unguarded physical confidence of a child who had never been told to make himself smaller. He crossed the lobby toward his mother, talking about something he had seen in the garden. Birds, it sounded like, arguing over something. And as he came, a gust of air moved through the lobby from the direction of the entrance doors, the automatic panels sliding open to admit someone else. And that gust scattered several pages from a manila folder that had been sitting unclipped on the edge of the reception counter. Pages flew. The receptionist exclaimed. 2 of them drifted past Tae-jin's feet. He bent on reflex, picked them up, and straightened, and found himself holding a document page and a photograph. He looked at the photograph. It was the boy. A candid shot, taken somewhere outdoors. A park, maybe, the light golden and afternoon warm. The boy was mid-laugh, face tipped up, arms thrown wide in that pure physical joy that children expressed before self-consciousness taught them to contain it. Around his neck, on a fine chain, hung a silver pendant, a phoenix. Its wings spread across the boy's small chest in that distinctive asymmetric design that Tae-jin recognized the way he recognized his own heartbeat, because he had held the original in his hands. He had gone to 3 different artisans before finding one who could reproduce the family crest in small enough scale. He had put it around Imani's neck himself, in the dark of her apartment, the night he told her that whatever came next, he would protect her. He was still looking at the photograph when the boy arrived beside his mother and looked up at Tae-jin with unguarded curiosity. The kid's face was clear and open and completely without guile. He had his mother's bone structure, the strong jaw, the wide-set eyes. But the eyes themselves were something else. Dense black, heavy-lidded at the outer corners, with a quality of stillness in them that had nothing to do with Imani and everything to do with the Kang family line. And on his left cheek, when the boy smiled at him, he smiled at him immediately, the way small children smiled at strangers whose expressions interested them. A dimple appeared, in exactly the place that the dimple appeared on every male born into the Kong bloodline for 4 generations. Malik! Imani had seen him. Her voice was steady, too steady. The steadiness of a person who had rehearsed for something, or perhaps who had spent 6 years knowing this moment was coming and had built armor around herself against it. Here's your photos back. Tajin handed the photograph to the boy without thinking. Malik took it with both hands and looked at it with satisfaction and tucked it back into the folder his mother was now holding closed. Then the boy looked back up at Taijin. "Why do you look like me?" he asked. Just like that. No preamble, no social filtering. The clean, direct logic of a child who had not yet learned that some questions weren't supposed to be asked in lobbies. Imani's jaw tightened. Something moved across her face. Pain, or the memory of pain, or something she'd been carrying so long it had grown roots. And she put her hand on Malik's shoulder and said, "Come on, baby." "But Mommy, I said come on." She started moving toward the elevator. The boy went with her, but he twisted back to look at Taijin over his shoulder, and his expression was the expression of a child who had asked a reasonable question and been denied an answer he was going to keep wanting. The elevator doors opened. Imani pressed a button without looking at the panel. She did not look at Taijin. The doors slid closed between them. Kang Taijin stood in the lobby of his father's hospital, holding nothing, and the locked room inside his chest cracked open, and 6 years of carefully managed grief fell out of it all at once. He didn't go upstairs immediately. He stood where he was for a full 2 minutes, which was 2 minutes longer than he had stood still in a non-tactical situation in years, and then he went to the men's room off the lobby and turned the cold tap and held both wrists under the water and breathed. Slow, deliberate, controlled. The problem with control was that it worked until it didn't. He had been told, 6 years ago, by Mr. Choi, who had sat across from him in the chairman's office, with a face full of careful sympathy, that Imani had left, that she had decided the life was too much, the danger too constant, the future too uncertain, that she had not said goodbye because she had not wanted a scene, that she had taken what she needed and gone back to the States, to family, to a safer kind of life. Choi had said it gently, with the practiced tenderness of a man who understood how much the words would cost. Tajin had not believed it at first. He had tried to call her. The number rang and rang. He had sent messages. Nothing. He had considered, briefly, with the last of the desperate irrational hope he still possessed at that time, going to find her. Choi had advised against it, gently, firmly. "She's made her choice, Tajina. Chasing her will only make it worse for both of you. You know she was never really able to carry what this life requires. It is better this way." He had believed it, eventually. Because the alternative was to believe that the man who had advised his family for 30 years was lying to him, and that possibility had not seemed possible. But she was here. She was here in his father's hospital, wearing scrubs and a hospital badge, and she had not run when she saw him. She had looked at him with the face of a woman who had been expecting this collision for a long time and had braced for it with both hands. And the boy. Taijin turned the tap off. He dried his hands. He looked at himself in the mirror for a moment, not with vanity. He'd never been a man for mirrors, but with the same diagnostic clarity he applied to everything when he needed to think. His face was expressionless. Good. He needed to stay expressionless. He needed to go upstairs and sit with his father and behave like a man who had not just had his entire version of the last 6 years pulled out from under him. He left the bathroom and went to the elevator. His father was in the therapy room when Taijin arrived, working through a series of grip exercises with a young physical therapist named Jiho, who had the patience of someone much older. The chairman's left hand was still significantly weaker than the right, but he was working it with the same grim, methodical stubbornness he had applied to everything in his life. He looked up when Taijin came in and gave a short nod. "You're late," the old man said. His voice had a rasp in it now, the residue of the stroke, but his diction was precise. "Traffic." "Sit down. Don't loom." Taijin sat in the chair against the wall. He watched his father work. The therapy session continued for another 20 minutes, quiet and focused. The only sound, the old man's occasional grunt of effort and the therapist's low encouragements. When it was finished and Jiho had excused herself, the chairman sat in his rehabilitation chair and regarded his son. "You look like something hit you," the old man said. "I'm fine." "I didn't ask if you were fine. I said you look like something hit you." Tejin said nothing. He had spent his entire life learning to be unreadable, and his father had spent that same lifetime learning to read him anyway. It was one of the specific irritations of being this man's son. "The park situation resolved," he said instead. "I know. Donghyun already called." The chairman's eyes stayed on him. "What happened downstairs?" "Nothing happened downstairs." "Kang Tae-jin." The old man said his full name the way he only said it when he wanted attention. "I'm old, and my hand doesn't work correctly, and I cannot leave this chair without assistance. The least you can do is speak honestly to me in this room." A long pause. "I saw someone in the lobby," Tae-jin said. "Someone I didn't expect to see." "Who?" He said nothing. "Who?" the chairman said again, and his voice had gone very quiet. Tae-jin looked at the window, at the garden below, at the courtyard where he realized now that he was looking at it from above. A small boy in a dinosaur shirt was crouched over something on the ground. A bug, maybe, or a rock. The absolute absorption of a child who had found something interesting. "Amani," he said. The silence in the rehabilitation room had a texture to it after he said the name. He watched his father's face, which did not move exactly but shifted, something behind the eyes, adjusting, recalculating. "She's here?" the chairman said. "She works here, by the look of it." Another silence. The old man looked out the window, and something in his profile changed. He was looking at the courtyard, at the small boy below. "The child," the chairman said, "is hers." Tajin's jaw was tight. He could feel the pressure of it in his temples. She called him Malik. The chairman said nothing for a very long moment. His right hand lay still on the armrest. His left hand, the weak one, was curled slightly in his lap, and the fingers moved. Not intentionally, just the low, persistent tremor that was always there now. "How old?" the old man said. It wasn't quite a question. 5? Maybe 6? More silence. Outside in the garden, the small boy had found whatever he was looking for and was now holding it up to the light, his face bright with the pure, uncomplicated triumph of discovery. "He's wearing the phoenix pendant," Tae-jin said. The words came out flat, declarative, like a report. Because if he allowed them to be anything other than flat and declarative, something structural inside him would give way, and he could not afford that. Not here. Not yet. "The one I gave her." He felt, rather than saw, his father's head turn toward him. He kept looking at the window. He found her in the hospital cafeteria on the 3rd floor at 11:45, sitting alone at a corner table with a coffee cup and a tablet, reading something. She heard him pull out the chair across from her and she looked up, and the fact that she didn't look surprised told him everything about how well she had managed herself since that morning. He sat down. She closed the tablet cover. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The cafeteria moved around them, trays, conversations, the hiss of the coffee machines, the bright overhead lighting that made everything look equally clinical. Somewhere in the room, a phone rang twice and stopped. She looked older. Not badly. Not diminished. She looked like a woman who had lived through something real and had not been broken by it, which was a different kind of aging than the kind he was familiar with. There were faint lines at the corners of her eyes. Her hands, folded on the table, were completely still. "You saw us this morning," she said. Not a question. "Yes." "I thought you might follow me up." "I needed a minute." She nodded slowly. Something in her expression was difficult to read, carefully managed, layered. The face of a woman who had rehearsed neutrality for a long time and worn it so often it had almost become natural. "He's mine," Tae-jin said. He kept his voice low, level. Every instinct in his body was firing simultaneously, and he was managing it all on the surface of his face, which remained still. "The boy." She held his gaze. "Yes, one word. No qualification, no apology, and no anger. Just the clean, simple confirmation of a fact she had apparently decided she was done hiding, or had decided at some point to stop hiding, or perhaps had been waiting for this exact conversation without knowing when it would arrive. 6 years, he said. 6 years. You were pregnant when... He stopped, started again. You were already pregnant when Choi told me you'd left the country. Something moved across her face at that. Not quite pain. The pain was too old and too settled for that word. Something more like the particular expression of a person who has carried a stone for so long they've forgotten what it felt like not to carry it, and someone has just picked up one corner of it. I was 4 months along, she said. I kept waiting for you to call. I kept waiting for some word, anything. She looked at the table for a moment, then back up at him. Her voice stayed steady. After 6 weeks, I stopped waiting. I had to. I had a child to carry. I did call, he said. Every number I had for you. I know. You know?
I didn't know then. I know now. She paused. I got a new phone, a new number. I thought if you wanted to find me, you would find me. You ran one of the most powerful criminal organizations in Korea. You could have found me if you'd wanted to. The words landed in the specific place where they were designed to land. He felt them, but underneath the sting of them was something else. The more complicated truth that she didn't have all of yet.
The number I had for you, he said, stopped connecting 2 weeks after Choi told me you were gone.
A pause. Very small. Her eyes held something careful. He said you'd blocked it. She looked at him. She looked at him for a long moment with those wide-set eyes that Malik had inherited, and some complex thing moved through her expression, understanding arriving in stages, each one worse than the last. I never blocked your number, she said. I know, he said. I know that now.
The cafeteria continued around them. Someone laughed across the room. The coffee machines hissed. In the bright, ordinary noise of the lunchroom, Kang Tae-jin sat across from the woman he had spent 6 years trying to forget, and felt the shape of what had been done to them begin to emerge from 6 years of mist. There was no other man, he said. There was never another man. Choi said,
I don't care what Choi said. Her voice had gone very quiet, the quietness of something with a great deal of pressure behind it. I have spent 6 years alone raising your son, and I have made my peace with that, and I have built a life here that works. And I came back to Korea because Seoul Children's Hospital offered me a position I couldn't refuse, and I told myself it didn't matter that you were here because I did not need anything from you. She stopped, breathed, steadied, and then this morning happened. This morning happened, he agreed. Another silence, different from the first one. He asked me, she said, on the way up in the elevator. He asked me why that man looked like him. She paused. I didn't answer him. What did you tell him? I told him I needed to think about it. She met his eyes again. I've been telling him that for about 20 minutes now, and it won't hold much longer. He's very persistent. He gets that from... She stopped herself. From his father, Tae-jin said. She said nothing. She looked down at her coffee cup. I want to talk to Choi, Tae-jin said. Something changed in her face. Something sharpened and went careful at the same time. Before you do that, she said it slowly, before you do anything, you should know that I had a conversation with your father last week. Tae-jin went very still. He didn't know who I was, she said. I didn't know who he was either, not at first. Malik found him in the courtyard. One of the nurses had brought him out for air, and you know how Malik is. He just started talking to him. The old man, your father, he started asking me questions. My name, where I was from, how long I'd been in Seoul. She paused. He was asking because he recognized the necklace. The pendant, the phoenix. He asked me where I got it, she said, and I told him. And then I watched him understand something, and then he looked at Malik for a very long time without speaking. She lifted her coffee cup and set it down again without drinking from it. He asked me to come back the next day. I did. Malik came with me. Your father and my son have been visiting every morning for a week. Tae-jin thought about his father in the rehabilitation chair this morning, watching the garden. The careful stillness of the old man's face. The question, how old? That had not quite been a question. He hadn't known. But he had been on the edge of knowing. Does Malik know who he is? Tae-jin asked. No, he calls him Hospital Grandpa.
The specific tenderness of that phrase went through Tae-jin like a blade going through something that had been braced against a different kind of cut. He stood up from the table. His chair scraped. "I'll deal with Choi," he said. "Tae-jin." She said his name. It was the first time she'd said his name since the lobby, and hearing it in her mouth was something he had not adequately prepared for. "Be careful what you do with what you find. Malik's life is stable right now. Whatever happened, whatever Choi did, my son's stability comes first." He looked at her. "Our son." Her jaw tightened, not in anger, in something more complicated. The expression of a person who had said "our" in reference to something for so long alone that hearing someone else say it required adjustment. "Our son," she repeated quietly. "Yes." He left the cafeteria. The drive back to Kang Syndicate headquarters took 40 minutes in midday traffic. Tae-jin sat in the back of the car and spoke to no one and looked at nothing and put everything he was feeling into a box and put the box somewhere he could get to it later and ran the math instead. Choi had told him Amani left. Choi had told him she had chosen to go. Choi had told him there was another man. Not definitively, not explicitly, but with the practiced implication of a man who knew how to steer a conversation toward a conclusion without ever quite saying the thing directly. He had been steering Tae-jin away from Amani from the beginning, before she disappeared. Subtle things. Concerns raised carefully over dinners and briefings. She's a good woman. But this life, she's struggling, Tae-jin. The stress is showing. Some people aren't built for this world. He had been laying groundwork. For what purpose? Tae-jin understood men like Choi because he had studied them his entire adult life. They were not malicious for the pleasure of malice. They were strategic. Every action Choi had taken would have had a reason behind it, a calculation, a vision of what the Kang Syndicate should be and who should be beside its leader. And a black nurse from a working-class background, American, foreign, with no connections to Korea's underworld hierarchy, would not have fit that vision. It was a theory. He needed evidence before he let it become a conviction. He had spent 20 years building an organization on the principle that instinct without evidence was just arrogance, and he was not going to stop applying that principle now just because the subject was personal, especially because the subject was personal. "Dong-hyun," he said. The man turned from the front seat. "Pull every communication record we have from 6 years ago. Anything connected to Amani Brooks. Messages, calls, reports, everything." A pause. "That's a large scope." "I know." "You want this through the usual, quietly," Tae-jin said. "No one else. Not even the floor managers. Just you and me." Dong-hyun looked at him for a moment with the flat, unreadable gaze of a man who had worked for the Kang family for 30 years and had learned that certain questions, when asked in a particular tone, were not questions at all. "Understood," he said. The car kept moving through Seoul. Quad. He went to see his father that evening. The chairman was in his suite, in the high-backed chair by the window, looking out at the city lights. He was awake when Tae-jin came in. He usually was in the evenings, the early morning therapy leaving him tired by midday, but alert by dusk. He looked at his son in the doorway and said nothing. Tae-jin pulled a chair close and sat down. "How long?" he said. "A week," the old man said. "The boy, 7 days." "Why didn't you tell me?" The chairman looked at his right hand resting on his knee, at the knuckles, at the familiar geography of a hand that had made many decisions over many decades, not all of them decisions he was proud of. "Because I was not certain," he said, "and because—" He stopped. Started again, more carefully. "Because I needed to know something before I said anything to you." "What did you need to know?" "Whether she was a good mother?" The simplicity of it. Tae-jin looked at his father. "She is," the old man said. "The boy is—" He paused, and something moved through the chairman's face that Tae-jin had not seen there in a very long time. Something that was not calculation or strategy or the managed affect of a man accustomed to power. Something rawer than all of that. "He is extraordinary. He talks constantly. He argues. He asked me why my hand didn't work correctly, and when I told him about the stroke, he asked me to explain what a stroke was. And then he told me that when he grew up, He was going to be a doctor and fix it. The old man's voice had gone rough. He said it like it was already decided. Taejin was quiet. He has your mother's eyes, the chairman said. I only understood that on the third day, when the light was right. Your mother had that same... He stopped. The same quality in them. Like they were looking through a thing, not at it. Taejin's mother had been gone for 15 years. I'm pulling Choi's records, Taejin said. The chairman's face went still and went cold at the same time, which was the Kang family's particular expression when they were preparing themselves for something they already half knew and did not want to have confirmed. Yes, he said. You suspected him. I asked myself questions, the chairman said carefully, that I did not like the answers to, after the woman came, after the boy. He looked out the window. I chose not to act on them until you and I had spoken. His jaw tightened, because I am the one who gave Choi his position. 30 years ago, I brought that man into this family. If he has done what I think he has done, he stopped. His left hand trembled slightly in his lap. Then I am the one who gave him the access. This isn't on you, Taejin said. I know whose fault it is. The old man's voice had gone very quiet. I know exactly whose fault it is. They sat together in the hospital room with the city lights below them, and neither of them spoke for a while. And it was the most honest silence Taejin could remember having with his father in years. The first results came at 2 a.m. Donghyun sent them encrypted to Taejin's private line, flagged critical, and Taejin opened them at his desk in the penthouse with a glass of water and both hands steady on the tablet. Call logs. 6 years back. His phone, outgoing, to Amani's number. 6 calls in 3 days, all showing connection attempts. All showing a standard completion status in his phone's record. But when he pulled the carrier records, the actual carrier records, which required a different kind of access that Donghyun had obtained through channels Taejin did not ask about, the calls showed something different. They had connected to an intermediary relay and been dropped before they ever reached her line. Someone had intercepted them at the network level. Someone with access to both their carrier accounts simultaneously. Someone with the resources and the knowledge of the Kang Syndicate's infrastructure to reroute communications without leaving an obvious trace in the standard records. Taejin set the tablet down. He picked it up again and looked at the second file, medical records. Pulled from Hansong Medical Center's older database, a different hospital from where Amani now worked, a maternity clinic across the city. He didn't ask how Donghyun had gotten them. He read the admission date. She had been admitted 3 weeks after Choi told him she had left Korea. She had been in Seoul. She had been in Seoul and pregnant and waiting, and he had been in this same city not knowing because the man he trusted had told him she was gone, had told him she had chosen to go, had managed every piece of information between them with the precision of someone who had planned it out in advance. He stood up from the desk. He walked to the window. Seoul sat below him the same way it always sat below him, massive and indifferent and lit up like an argument, a city that had been burning through its own contradictions for decades and did not particularly care who stood at which window watching it do so. He thought about Amani in the cafeteria, her hands folded on the table, her voice carefully steady. 6 years alone raising a child who had the Kang family's eyes and his grandfather's stubbornness and the specific quality of persistence that Taejin had spent his entire adult life either deploying against his enemies or managing in himself. He thought about Malik in the lobby, pressing his palms against the glass to look at the garden. Malik holding the photograph with both hands. Malik looking up at him with the clean directness of a child who saw what he saw and asked about what he saw and would not be told to stop seeing it. Why do you look like me? Taejin stayed at the window for a long time. When he finally turned back to the desk, he opened a new message to Donghyun. Schedule a meeting with Choi, he typed. Headquarters, my office. Day after tomorrow. Tell him it's a routine briefing. He sent the message. Then he opened another window on the tablet and stared at it for a moment before he typed. The number was from memory. He had told himself years ago that he had forgotten it. He had been wrong about that, as it turned out. He had been wrong about quite a few things. He typed, I need to talk. Not about Choi. About Malik. About what I owe you. About what I want to fix. I know I have no right to ask you for anything, Tell me what would help and I will do it. He looked at the message for a long time. He sent it. He put the tablet down and looked out at the city and waited to see if she would answer. 3 minutes later, the tablet lit up. One line. Start by telling me everything you find in those records. All of it. Even the parts that will make you look like a fool. Especially those parts. He looked at her answer for a long moment. Then, for the first time in 6 years, something in Kang Tae-jin's chest shifted. Not healed. Not resolved. But moved. Moved toward something, rather than away from it, which was a direction he had not traveled in a very long time. He picked up the tablet and began to type. He did not notice this time passing. He did not notice when Seoul's arguments dimmed toward the gray calm of 4 in the morning. He sat at his desk in the penthouse on the 43rd floor and wrote to the mother of his son, and somewhere across the city in an apartment he did not yet know the address of, a woman read what he wrote and wrote back, and between them in that quiet exchange the outline of a truth began to take shape, ragged, complicated, still full of 6 years of damage that would not dissolve overnight, but visible. For the first time visible. He was still at his desk when his phone rang at 6:45 in the morning. He did not recognize the number and answered it anyway. Mr. Kang! A woman's voice, professionally measured in the way of someone accustomed to delivering difficult information. This is Nurse Han at Hansong Medical Center. I'm calling because there's been an incident involving your son. The words landed in his chest like a dropped stone into still water. His son. The nurse had said, your son. What kind of incident? He said. His voice was very calm. The kind of calm that preceded things that were not calm at all. Malik was brought in this morning by Dr. Brooks. He fell in the courtyard and hit his head. He's stable, but Dr. Brooks has requested... The nurse paused. She's asked if you could come. She said... Another pause. She said Malik is asking for his father. Tae-jin was already standing. He was already moving toward the door. His keys were in his hand before the sentence finished. Tell her I'm coming, he said. He hung up. He walked out of the penthouse and into the elevator, and the elevator dropped 43 floors and opened into the underground garage, and the car was already waiting because Dong-hyun had apparently heard him moving and had called ahead. And Tae-jin got in, and the car moved before the door was fully closed. A child he had not known existed yesterday was in a hospital bed asking for him. And somewhere in the same building, the records Dong-hyun had pulled were telling a story about what Choi had stolen from all of them. Not just from Tae-jin, not just from Imani, but from a small boy who had grown up without a father, who had spent his mornings talking to a stranger in a garden because something in him recognized something he had no language for yet. The car moved through the early morning city. Tae-jin leaned his head back against the seat and closed his eyes and let himself feel, for exactly the length of a red light, the full weight of everything he was about to walk into. Then the light changed, and he opened his eyes, and he went to his son. Chet. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic, and the particular stillness of a space where someone had recently been frightened. Malik was sitting up in the bed when Tae-jin arrived. Not lying down, sitting up, which was the first thing Tae-jin noticed, because a child who was sitting up was a child who was not badly hurt. And the relief of that knowledge moved through him so fast and so completely that he had to stop in the doorway for a half-second to let it pass before he could make his face do what he needed it to do. The boy had a bandage above his left eyebrow, small, clean. He was holding a cup of juice with both hands and watching the door with the alert, assessing expression of a child who had learned that adults behaved interestingly when they thought they were not being observed. When Tae-jin appeared in the doorway, Malik looked at him with the same flat evaluative gaze he had turned on him in the lobby the previous morning, and then he said without any preamble at all, "You came fast." "Yes," Tae-jin said. "Mom said you might not come." Tae-jin looked at Imani, who was standing near the window with her arms crossed and her face arranged in an expression that said very clearly she had not said that and was going to be having words with her son about what got reported to who. Her eyes met Tae-jin's briefly and then moved away. "I came," Tae-jin said. He moved into the room, pulled a chair close to the bed, and sat down so that he was at the boy's level. This was instinct, not calculation. He was not a man who spent time around children, and he had no idea what he was doing, but something in him understood that standing over a small person who was sitting in a hospital bed was the wrong geometry.
Malik studied him with the juice cup still held in both hands. "I fell," he announced, "on the steps in the garden. Mom says I wasn't watching where I was going. I was watching a bird." He paused. "That's not the same as not watching." "What kind of bird?" Malik's expression shifted fractionally. Not quite approval, but something like it. The expression of a child who had not expected to be asked a follow-up question. "Gray one, with a red part." He indicated his own chest. "Here, a red-breasted nuthatch, maybe." "What's a nuthatch?" "A small bird that climbs down trees head first." Malik processed this. "Why head first?" "To find insects that birds looking the right way miss." Malik looked at him for another moment and then nodded slowly, in the manner of someone filing information away for future use. "Okay," he said. Amani said from the window, "The doctor says he's fine. No concussion. They want to keep him for observation for 2 hours and then we can go." "Good," Taejin said. He did not look at her yet. He kept looking at Malik. "Does it hurt?" "A little," Malik said, with the particular honesty of a child who had been taught not to perform toughness, but also not to perform weakness. "Not a lot." He looked at the bandage he couldn't see, but apparently knew the location of by feel. "Mom cried a little when we first got here." "Malik," Amani said. "She did." "I know she did," Taejin said quietly. Imani's breath shifted. He heard it from across the room. A small adjustment, the kind a person made when something landed unexpectedly. He still didn't look at her, not yet. "Hospital Grandpa came," Malik said. "Before you. A nurse brought him in the wheelchair. He held my hand for a while." The boy looked down at his own hand, then up at Taejin. "He calls me Little General. I don't know why." Taejin did know why. His father had called him the same thing at approximately the same age, in approximately the same tone. Part affection, part recognition. The way you named something you understood. "It's a compliment," Taejin said. "I know." Malik set his juice down on the tray table. He looked at Taejin with the sudden directness that was apparently just his natural mode of operating. "Are you my dad?" The question hung in the antiseptic air of the small hospital room, and it did not ask permission, and it did not apologize for itself. And it was exactly the question a child with this particular bloodline would ask at this particular moment, because there was no version of this boy that would wait politely for adults to sort themselves out at their own pace. Taejin held the boy's gaze. "Yes," he said. Malik took that in. His face did several things very quickly. Something that moved through surprise toward consideration, toward something more complicated and more settling. A child building a structure in real time out of information he had been assembling for longer than this conversation. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay?" "I had a feeling," Malik said, "because of the looking like thing, and because of Hospital Grandpa. He looks like you." He paused. "And because Mom gets a different face when someone says your name." Amani made a sound that was not quite a word. "What kind of face?" Taejin asked. Malik considered this with absolute seriousness. "Like when she's trying not to feel a thing she's feeling," he said. "She does that with her jaw." Taejin looked at Imani then. He couldn't help it. She was standing by the window with her arms still crossed and her jaw doing exactly what Malik had described, and her eyes were bright in a way that was not tears yet and might not get there, but were definitely in the neighborhood. "We're going to talk," Taejin said to her. Not a question. "We are," she said. Her voice was controlled. "After he gets discharged." "Good." "Dead." The 2 hours moved slowly. Taejin stayed. He did not perform staying, but he did not make a show of it or announce it or behave as if it required comment. He simply did not leave. He sat in the chair by Malik's bed and answered questions about birds and about whether sharks could smell blood from a mile away and about whether the city would ever run out of buildings. And in the window, Imani watched him with the careful measuring gaze of a woman who had been making survival decisions for 6 years and was not about to stop now just because the situation had changed. At one point, a nurse came in to check vitals, and Malik told her with great confidence that his dad had just arrived, and the nurse looked between Taejin and the boy, and then at Imani, and Imani said, "It's accurate," in the flat tone of a woman delivering a fact about weather. When the doctor discharged Malik at 11, and the boy was allowed to dress and gather his backpack,
Taejin stepped into the hallway. Donghyun was there, at the end of the corridor, far enough away to give space. His face was its usual flat surface, but when Taejin met his eyes, the man gave a small tilt of his chin that communicated in the compressed language they'd developed over years. There is more. More than what I sent last night. More that you need to see. Taejin crossed to him. How much more? He said, low. Enough, Donghyun said. The phone relay. I traced it. It's not a carrier-level intercept. It went through a private communications management system, custom-built. He paused. The technical architecture is consistent with the kind of thing our organization has used internally for secure communications. Someone built it specifically to intercept traffic between two lines, hers and yours. That takes resources. Yes. And knowledge of our internal systems. Yes. Neither of them said Choi's name. They didn't need to. The hospital admission record, Taejin said. The maternity clinic. There's more there too. Donghyun reached into his jacket and produced a folded envelope. He held it out. I printed these. Don't want this on any network right now. Taejin took the envelope. He did not open it in the hallway. The meeting is still set for day after tomorrow? Yes. He confirmed this morning. He seemed... Donghyun paused, which was unusual. Donghyun did not pause often. Relaxed. He seemed relaxed. He doesn't know what we're looking at. Apparently not. Taejin pocketed the envelope. Good. Keep it that way. He went back to the hospital room. Malik was attempting to put on his own backpack with the bandaged forehead and making it a point of pride to do so without assistance. Imani was watching him with the expression of a mother who had learned precisely when to intervene and when to let a child fight his own small battles. She had gotten it right. She always seemed to get it right, from what Taejin had observed in the accumulated hours of watching her this morning. And Malik won the battle with the backpack and announced he was ready. I'll drive you, Taejin said. Imani looked at him. Both of you, he said. Home. A pause. Long enough to mean something. Short enough not to make Malik notice. Okay, she said. They took his car. Donghyun rode in front, which meant the back seat held the three of them. Malik in the middle, pressed between his parents in the easy physical way of a child who did not yet understand that the two people on either side of him were operating at significant personal cost in order to maintain normal functioning in his presence. Malik talked for approximately the first 4 minutes about the nuthatch and whether Taejin had ever seen one in real life. And then he fell asleep between them with the sudden totality of a child whose body had decided that the morning's excitement was over and processing time was required. His head tipped sideways and came to rest against Taejin's arm. Taejin did not move. He did not move for the entire 23 minutes it took to cross the city to Imani's apartment building in Mapo-gu. He sat completely still with his son's weight against his arm and looked out the window at Seoul and breathed. Imani looked at Malik's face and did not look at Taejin. When the car stopped, they transferred Malik to his mother, who carried him with the practiced efficiency of 6 years of solo operation, the way she shifted his weight to her left hip, the way he curled against her without waking. Taejin held the car door. He followed her into the building and into the elevator without being invited, and she did not tell him to leave. She settled Malik on the couch in the apartment's small living room with a blanket and his backpack within reach, and then she went to the kitchen and Taejin followed her there, and she put the kettle on without asking him if he wanted anything. The kitchen was small and clean and had drawings on the refrigerator. Malik's work, the style was immediately recognizable. The same specific quality of line that indicated a child who drew constantly and had developed genuine ability. There was a cityscape. There was a figure that was recognizably Imani. There was a drawing of an old man in a chair, Chairman Kang, Taejin realized, in the wheelchair, drawn from Malik's particular perspective as a child who had sat on the floor of a hospital garden looking up. There was one drawing with a blank space in it, a family. Malik, Imani, an empty figure where a third person should have been. Taejin looked at it for a long moment. He draws constantly, Imani said, not looking at him. She was watching the kettle. He's been drawing that one for about 3 months. He keeps leaving the third figure unfinished. He won't tell me why. He knew, Taejin said. Children know things, she said. They don't have the language for it, but they know. The kettle began to steam. She made 2 cups and put one in front of him on the counter without looking at his face. She wrapped both hands around hers and leaned against the opposite counter and looked at him with the steady assessing gaze that he remembered from 6 years ago. The look she had always given him when she was deciding how much of the truth she was willing to put into words. "What did you find?" she said. He reached into his jacket and put the envelope on the counter between them. She looked at it for a moment, then reached out and opened it. She read in silence. Her face went very still as she read. Not blank, still. The stillness of something under enormous pressure. "The phone relay," she said when she finished. "He built an interception system, specifically targeting our 2 lines. How long before the money for that gets traced back to someone in your organization? Dongyun is working on it, but the architecture is already pointing in one direction." She set the papers down on the counter. She picked up her tea and held it and did not drink it. "I called you," she said quietly, "when I was 4 months pregnant and had not heard from you in 6 weeks and was starting to understand that something was wrong. I called from the hospital, from a landline, not my personal number." She looked at the papers. "Do those records show that call?" Taejin looked at the top page. "There's a landline entry from Hansong Maternity Clinic, connected to my line and ran for 4 minutes. Her jaw moved. "You didn't answer." "I never received it." He looked at the records. "My line shows no incoming call from that number on that date." She set the tea down. She put both palms flat on the counter and looked at the refrigerator, at Malik's drawings, at the blank figure in the family portrait. "He answered," she said. "It went to your office line and he answered. He said you weren't available. He said—" She stopped, breathed. "He said you were in a meeting and you'd been very stressed, and the best thing for everyone, including me and the baby, was to give you space. He said you'd be in touch." The kitchen was very quiet. "He knew about the baby," Taejin said. "He knew." Her voice had gone low, not broken. She was not a woman who broke easily, and 6 years of single parenthood had built something in her that was past breaking, but compressed. Dense with something that had been held for a very long time. "He knew, and he told me to give you space, and I waited another month, and then I stopped waiting. Because I was 23 years old and 4 months pregnant and alone in a foreign country, and I could not keep spending my energy on someone who had apparently decided I was not worth the callback. Ishi ma boshmushmar squad. Imani, I'm not asking for an apology right now," she said, sharply. "Not cruelty. Precision. The precision of a woman who knew exactly what she needed and what she did not. I don't want an apology. I want to understand what we are going to do about the man who did this." Taejin picked up the envelope and folded it and put it back in his pocket. "He's coming to headquarters day after tomorrow." "Does he know why?" "He thinks it's a routine briefing." She was quiet for a moment. "Your father," she said. "Does he know what you found?" "Not the specifics yet. He suspects. He already moved toward a conclusion on his own." He paused. "He won't protect Choi." "I'm not asking him to protect Choi." She looked at him. "I'm asking if he's prepared for what this means. Because it means 30 years of trust was a transaction, and that's a different kind of wound for a man his age." The accuracy of that sat in the kitchen between them like something with weight. "He knows that already," Taejin said. "He's made his peace with it faster than I have." "You haven't made your peace with it yet." "No, neither have I." She picked up her tea. "I spent 6 years believing you chose your empire over me and your child. I made myself stop being angry about it because anger was going to destroy me, and Malik needed a mother who was functional. I built a life. I got my specialty certification. I took the position here because Seoul Children's Hospital is one of the best in the world, and my son deserves the best schools and the best city and the best—" She stopped. "I told myself coming back here was about Malik's future, about my career. I told myself it had nothing to do with the fact that some part of me never fully believed the story." What part didn't believe it? She looked at him, at his face, at the particular combination of features that had appeared in the small face of her son on the day he was born and had been looking at her every day since. "You never sent a single message," she said. "Not one. You called or you didn't, but you always sent messages. You were a man who wrote things down because you trusted writing more than speaking." She paused. Not one message. After 6 weeks of silence, not one line of text. I kept waiting for one. Just one. Even a goodbye. Even an explanation. She looked at the counter. And it never came. And that was the thing I couldn't explain. So I stopped trying to explain it and moved on. "He deleted them," Tejan said. "I know that now. All of them. From both directions. Everything I sent, everything you sent. There are gaps in the records where the messages should be. He was managing a conversation that was never happening." She nodded slowly. "I need to ask you something," Tejan said. "And I need you to answer me honestly, even if the honest answer is something you think I don't want to hear." She waited. "Do you want him handled quietly?" he said. "Or do you want him to answer for it?" Her eyes went sharp. "What does handled quietly mean in your world?" "It means he disappears. From the organization, from the city if necessary. No formal confrontation. He loses everything he has without ever being given the chance to explain himself to anyone. An answer for it means he sits in a room with me and my father and the evidence, and he answers every question I have. He hears what he took from us. He understands the full scope of what he did before he loses everything." She thought about it. She gave it real thought. He watched her do it, watched her weigh it with the same serious, methodical attention she gave everything, the quality that had drawn him to her 6 years ago when he'd watched her work. A woman who did not rush her own thinking. "I want him to answer for it," she said. "I want him in a room where he has to say out loud what he did and why. Not for me. For Malik." She met his eyes. "Because someday my son is going to ask me what happened to the man who kept his parents apart, and I want to be able to tell him that the man was made to face what he did. I want that on record somewhere, even if the record only exists in that room." Tejan nodded. "And then?" she asked. "Then it's done," he said. "Whatever my father decides." "Will your father actually—" She stopped, chose her words. "He's not going to— Choi will leave the organization. He'll lose his position, his standing, everything connected to the Kang name. In our world, that is a very significant destruction." He paused. "Is that enough for you?" She held his gaze. "I didn't say I wanted him destroyed. I said I wanted him to answer." She put her cup in the sink. "Those are different things." "They are," he agreed. He left her apartment at 1 in the afternoon. He stood on the sidewalk outside her building for a moment with the city noise around him, traffic, a child somewhere above screaming with laughter, a delivery motorcycle threading between cars, and took out his phone and called Dong-hyun. "Add my father to the meeting," he said. A pause. "The chairman. In person." "Yes. He'll need transport, medical clearance for the chair. Arrange it." 태진아. 동현은 친숙한 어드레스는 매우 드물게 썼다. 오직 상황이 이를 요구할 때, 즉 상황이 이를 요구할 때만. "너는 이 상황에 대해 확신이 있니?" This. Confronting Choi with your father present. "If this goes sideways, it won't go sideways," Tejan said. "I have everything I need. He won't have room to maneuver." A long pause. "And the woman? Dr. Brooks?" "Not in the room. This stays between the three of us." Understood. Tejan hung up. He stood on the sidewalk another moment. He thought about the unfinished drawing on the refrigerator, the blank figure where a father should have been. He thought about his father in the rehabilitation chair, watching the garden, watching a boy who talked constantly and argued and had decided to become a doctor. He thought about Choi, the careful sympathy of Choi's face across the chairman's desk 6 years ago, the practiced tenderness, the gentle, firm, devastating management of a story that was never true. He thought about what it meant to spend 30 years building trust inside a family and then spend one deliberate, calculating season destroying what that family loved most. He put his phone in his pocket and walked toward the car and did not think about any of it anymore, because there was no value in thinking about it further. He had the evidence. He had the meeting. He had his father's support. He had 2 days. The next morning, he went back to the hospital. Not for the meeting. That was tomorrow. He went because Amani had texted him at 7:15 with a single line. Malik asked if you're coming today. I didn't know what to tell him. He went. Malik was in the courtyard with Chairman Kang when Taejin arrived. The old man in his wheelchair, and the boy cross-legged on the ground beside him, and between them on the low garden wall was the spread of a card game that Taejin did not recognize but that appeared to have rules Malik had invented. Based on the way the boy was explaining them with authoritative confidence, and the way the chairman was listening with the serious attention of someone who understood that the rules of a game invented by a 5-year-old were not to be questioned. Taejin stood at the garden entrance and watched them for a moment. His father's left hand rested on the arm of the wheelchair, the tremor in his fingers less visible today. Or maybe Taejin was looking at it differently. Malik said something that made the chairman laugh, a short, rough sound that Taejin had not heard from the old man in, he could not remember how long. Long. He walked into the garden. Malik saw him first. The boy's face lit up with a directness of expression that hit Taejin somewhere embarrassingly central. And then Malik immediately reasserted composure and returned to looking at his cards with studied nonchalance, as if he had not just visibly been glad to see him. He recognized that move. He had done that exact move his entire life. You're late, Malik said, exactly as his grandfather had said it yesterday morning. Traffic, Taejin said. The chairman looked up at his son. His expression was complex, dense, the expression of a man who was looking at something he had thought he lost and finding it in a different shape than he expected, in a place he did not expect to find it. He held Taejin's gaze for a moment and then looked at the boy and then back at Taejin with something in his eyes that did not need to be spoken. Taejin sat down on the garden wall on Malik's other side. Explain the game, he said. Malik explained it. It took 6 minutes. The rules were elaborate and clearly improvised in real time based on what cards were available, and neither Taejin nor the chairman questioned any of them. They played for an hour. That evening, Taejin met his father alone in the rehabilitation suite. He laid the printed records on the small table between them and stood back and let the old man read. Chairman Kang read everything slowly, with the care of someone who had spent a lifetime parsing documents in which details mattered. When he finished, he stacked the pages neatly and placed them on the table and put one hand flat on top of them. He did not speak for almost 2 minutes. He called her, the chairman said finally. When she called the office, he answered and he told her you were unavailable and to give you space. Yes. While she was carrying my grandchild. The old man's voice was very quiet. The quietness of something that had a long way to fall before it reached what it was going to become. Yes. Another silence. I brought him in 30 years ago, the chairman said. He was young. He was competent. I trusted him with things that I did not trust to my own family because I believed his judgment was clean. He stopped. His left hand was trembling again, the persistent tremor, but his right hand on the papers was completely flat and still. His judgment was not clean. It was just mine. He was enforcing a version of this family that I taught him to believe in, and I taught him to believe in it by the way I ran things for 30 years, and I cannot... He stopped again. His jaw worked. I am not without responsibility. You didn't know. I built the world he acted inside of, the old man said, with a precision that cut through Taejin's interruption. I built a world where that kind of thinking had no consequences, where that kind of decision, who belongs, who doesn't belong, what blood is acceptable, was never confronted. I looked at Amani 6 years ago, and I did not... He stopped. His voice had gone rough in a different way than the stroke had made it rough. I did not object to his concerns when he raised them. I let them sit. I thought they would resolve themselves. Taejin said nothing. There was nothing useful to say. That is its own kind of fault, the chairman said. Not the same, but not nothing. No, Taejin agreed. Not nothing. The old man looked at the window, at the dark garden below. I want to be in the room tomorrow, he said. I know. I want him to look at me when he says it. He'll have to. Good. The chairman's right hand lifted from the papers, and he set it on the armrest and looked at it, at the familiar geography of it. Bring the records, all of them. Lay them on the table before he sits down so he can see them the moment he walks in. He paused. I want him to understand, in the first second he enters that room, that there is no story he can tell us that we haven't already read.
Yes, and Taejin. The old man looked at him, the dense black eyes unchanged. When it's over, and it will be over tomorrow, all of it, everything with Choi, what comes next is not about him anymore. Taejin held his father's gaze.
What comes next, the old man said, is about the boy, and the boy's mother, and whether we are the kind of family that earns what it's asking for, or the kind that simply takes it because it believes it's owed. He paused. We don't get to be owed this. We lost that 6 years ago. We start from nothing, and we earn it. Taejin thought about Imani in her kitchen, palms flat on the counter, looking at her son's drawings on the refrigerator. He thought about the blank figure in the family portrait.
I know, he said.
Good. The chairman settled back in his chair. He looked tired now. Truly tired, the bone-deep tiredness of a man who was old and sick and had just read documents confirming that someone he loved had done something unforgivable. But his eyes were still clear, still looking through things rather than at them. Go home. Get some sleep. Tomorrow is going to require everything you have. Taejin picked up the papers from the table. He went to the door. Taejina. He stopped. The boy called me Grandpa again this morning, the chairman said. Before you arrived. He did not ask permission, he simply did it. A pause. The rough voice going rougher. I would like to keep that. Taejin looked at his father. So would I, he said. He walked out. In the corridor outside his father's room, he stopped and put one hand flat against the wall and breathed. Slow, deliberate. The way he managed things that needed managing. Through the wall he could hear very faintly the sound of the city, traffic and distance and soul arguing with itself the way it always did, never arriving at a conclusion, never deciding to stop. Tomorrow, Choi would walk into a room thinking he was walking into a routine briefing. He would sit down, he would see the records on the table, and then everything would come to its point. Taejin pushed off the wall and walked toward the elevator and thought about nothing and thought about everything, and by the time the elevator opened, he had his face back in order, which was the only preparation left to do. The meeting was tomorrow, and there was nowhere left to. The conference room on the 14th floor of Kang Syndicate headquarters had no windows. Taejin had chosen it deliberately. There were nicer rooms, rooms with views of the city, rooms with the kind of light that made conversations feel less like what they were. This room had recessed lighting and a long table and chairs that did not encourage comfort, and it smelled of recycled air and the particular staleness of a space used for decisions that did not leave the building. He arrived at 7 in the morning, 2 hours before the meeting. He needed the room to be his before Choi walked into it. Dong-yoon had already laid the records on the table, printed, organized, stacked in the specific order Taejin had specified. Call logs on the left, carrier intercept records in the center, medical admission files on the right, photographs of the communications architecture, the relay system, the custom interception infrastructure, arranged across the top of the spread like the header of a document that said everything before a single word was spoken. Taejin stood at the head of the table and looked at it. 6 years of a man's work, laid out on a conference table. The entire architecture of a lie, in paper form. It was less dramatic than he had expected it to look. Just documents. Just the flat bureaucratic evidence of choices made in private by someone who had believed he would never have to account for them. He pulled out the chair at the head of the table and sat down and folded his hands and waited. Chairman Kang arrived at 8:30, transported in the medical chair by 2 of Dong-hyun's men. He was dressed in a dark suit. He had insisted on the suit, Dong-hyun had told Taejin, had refused the hospital robe and the casual clothes, and had apparently made his preference for the suit clear in the specific way that aging men who had run criminal organizations for 3 decades made preferences clear. He looked diminished by the chair in the way he always looked diminished by it, the wheelchair reducing the physical authority that had once filled every room he entered. But his eyes, when they moved across the documents on the table, were not diminished at all. He said nothing when he came in. He looked at the records spread across the table. He looked at Taejin. He nodded once. Dong-hyun positioned the chair to the chairman's right and left the room. They waited. At 9 o'clock exactly, the door opened. Choi Man-sik was 62 years old and had the build of a man who had once been physically powerful and had allowed that power to settle into something more compact and dense with age. He had silver hair, cut short, and the kind of face that defaulted to concerned attentiveness, an expression so habitual it had calcified into something that looked almost sincere. He had been the Kang Syndicate's chief advisor for 30 years. He had sat in more rooms like this one than most men alive. He walked in without hesitation. That was the first thing. He walked in the way a man walked into a room he belonged in, with the loose-limbed confidence of someone who did not expect the room to challenge him. Then he saw the documents on the table. The hesitation was very small, a fraction of a second. The kind of pause that only registered if you were specifically watching for it, which Taijin was, and had been, and had counted on. Choi's eyes moved across the spread of papers, across the call logs, across the intercept architecture photographs, across the medical records. His face did not change. This was either innocence or the performance of innocence, and Taijin had spent 20 years learning to tell the difference, and what he was looking at was not innocence. Taijin, Choi said, and then, seeing the chairman, Chairman, I didn't know you'd be joining us. Should I have— Sit down, Mansik, the chairman said. The use of the first name. Taijin watched Choi process it. The register, the flatness of it, the absence of the honorifics that 30 years of relationship had built into the architecture of how these two men spoke to each other. Something behind Choi's eyes recalibrated. He sat down, across from the documents, close enough to read them if he looked directly at them, which he did not. He kept his eyes on Taijin. What is this? He said. You know what it is, Taijin said. I can see that it's documents. I don't know what they— The phone relay, Taijin said. The interception system you built to redirect calls between my line and Imani Brooks's line. The carrier records showing the calls I made to her number were rerouted before they connected. The medical records showing she was admitted to Hanseong Maternity Clinic 3 weeks after you told me she had left Korea. The log of the call she made from the clinic's landline to my office line, which you answered. He paused. Shall I keep going? Or do you want to tell me when you'd like to stop pretending you don't know what any of this is? The room was very quiet. Choi looked at the documents now. He looked at them with the careful attention of a man assessing damage. Not the attention of someone seeing something new, but the attention of someone calculating how much of what he'd built had been uncovered. The records can be misread, he said. They can't, Taijin said. Carrier records at that level of granularity are notoriously Mansik. The chairman's voice, just the name, just 2 syllables, but delivered with a weight that the stroke had not taken from him. It stopped Choi mid-sentence. I have been listening to you explain things in this organization for 30 years. I know what your explanations sound like when they are honest. I know what they sound like when they are not. He paused. This is not an explanation. This is a man buying time. Stop buying time. Choi's jaw tightened. Something shifted in his face. The careful, concerned attentiveness cracking along its edges. The thing underneath it beginning to show. He looked at the chairman for a long moment. Then he looked at the table. I did what I believed was necessary, he said. Taijin had expected denial to last longer. He had prepared for an hour of it, had built the entire structure of the meeting around the assumption that they would have to crack through layers of misdirection before reaching anything real. The speed of the admission, if it was an admission, recalibrated something in his chest. What you believed was necessary, Taijin repeated. Yes. Choi's voice had changed register. The practice deference was gone. What was underneath it was not remorse, not yet, maybe not at all. It was the voice of a man who had been keeping something at pressure for a long time and had just been given, or been forced to take, the release valve. I believed it was necessary for the Kong family, for the organization, for everything your father built and everything you were supposed to inherit. I was supposed to inherit my son, Taijin said. His voice was very flat. I was supposed to know my son existed. You would have— Choi stopped, restarted. She was not suited for this life. She was not— Say the rest of it, Taijin said. Say the entire sentence. Choi looked at him. His jaw was tight. Whatever it was he was about to say, he had apparently been holding it inside the architecture of his reasoning for 6 years, where it had sounded like strategy, and now, forced out into the open air of the conference room, was starting to understand what it actually was. She was a foreign woman, Choi said, from a working-class background. No connections, no standing, no understanding of what this family required. He looked at the table. A black American nurse who had been in Korea for 18 months. If you had built a family with her, if that child had been publicly acknowledged— Stop, the chairman said. Choi stopped. The chairman's right hand was flat on the table. His left hand was trembling in his lap. His face had gone through several things very quickly and had arrived at something that was colder than anger and quieter than grief. The expression of a man who has heard the confession of someone he loved and understood that the love and the confession could not coexist without one of them destroying the other. You did not do this to protect the organization, the chairman said. You did this because you believed she did not belong. Because you looked at that woman and you made a calculation about her worth based on what she looked like and where she came from. And you decided your calculation was more important than my son's life and hers and the child they made together. He paused, each sentence arriving separately, with space between them. You did not consult me. You did not bring your concerns to me. You acted alone because you believed you already knew what I would want, because you had spent 30 years learning to want what I wanted. And somewhere in those 30 years, you stopped understanding that what I want and what I am are not the same thing. Choi said nothing. Look at me, the chairman said. Choi looked at him. I brought you into this family, the chairman said. I trusted you with things I did not trust my own blood with. I gave you 30 years of my confidence. His voice was rough and precise and very quiet. And you used that confidence to steal my grandchild's first 6 years of life, to steal my son's right to know his own child, to steal a woman's right to the truth about the man she loved. He stopped. You did not do any of this for the Kong family. You did it for a version of the Kang family that exists only in your own head, a version I did not ask you to protect. The room held all of this. The recycled air and the recessed lighting and the flat bureaucratic evidence on the table, and between the three men at that table, the specific silence of something that has been broken past the point of repair. Taejin watched Choi's face. He watched it because he had spent 20 years watching faces in rooms like this one, and he knew what capitulation looked like, and he knew what it looked like when someone was calculating their next move inside the performance of capitulation, and he needed to know which one he was seeing. What he saw was neither. What he saw was something that surprised him, something that looked underneath the surface of the cracking, careful face, like the expression of a man who had spent 6 years telling himself a story about what he'd done and why, and was now in the room where the story ended, and was understanding for the first time that the story he'd been telling himself was not the story at all. It was just the version of events that allowed him to sleep. I thought, Choi started. I don't need to know what you thought, Taejin said. I need you to understand what you did. Say it. Not what you believed, not what you intended, what you did. A long silence. Choi's hands on the table were very still. I intercepted your communications, he said. Both directions. I told her you were unavailable when she called. I told you she had left and chosen another life. I managed the information between you until she was gone and there was nothing left to manage. He paused. I knew she was pregnant. I knew, and I made the decision that it was better for the child to be raised elsewhere, that it was better for the organization. For the organization, Taejin said. Yes. Not for Malik. The name. Choi looked at him when he heard the name. Something moved across his face. Not quite surprise, more the particular flinch of a person who has been dealing in abstractions and has just been handed a specific. He has a name, Taejin said. He's 5 years old. He draws constantly. He talks about birds. He has the Kang family dimple on his left cheek, and your careful strategy gave him 6 years without a father and gave me 6 years not knowing he existed. He leaned forward slightly. Say his name. Choi's mouth worked. His eyes were doing something complicated. Malik, he said. Again. Malik. The second time it came out differently. Lower. Like the word had weight the first time had not allowed for. There's a drawing on a refrigerator in Mapo-gu, Taejin said. A child's drawing. His mother, himself, and a blank space where his father should be. He has been leaving it unfinished for 3 months. He held Choi's gaze. That blank space has your name on it. The silence after that was the longest silence yet. Then the door opened. Taejin looked up. Donghyun was in the doorway. His face was doing nothing at all, which was the specific expression Donghyun had when something was wrong and he was managing how to deliver it. His eyes went to Taejin and held there. "There's a situation," Donghyun said. "We're not finished," Taejin said. Taejin, the first name again. Donghyun only did that when it was already past the point of waiting. It needs to be now. Something cold moved through Taejin's chest. He looked at the chairman, who gave a short nod. He stood. He looked at Choi. "Stay in this room," he said. "Not a request. Do not move from that chair." He walked out. Donghyun closed the conference room door behind them and walked fast toward the far end of the corridor, away from the room, before he spoke. "The building across the street," he said. "East-facing, 6th floor. We picked up a long-range surveillance unit approximately 40 minutes ago. Photography, possibly audio." He kept his voice low and his face forward. "It's not ours." Taejin walked beside him. "Who? We're working on it. The unit was positioned before you arrived this morning, before the chairman arrived." Someone knew about the meeting. Yes. Taejin processed this. The meeting was set 2 days ago. The communication went through your private channel. Yes. Donghyun's voice was careful. My private channel. And Choi's confirmation, which came through the same channel. They stopped at the end of the corridor. Taejin looked at the wall in front of him. "He told someone," Taejin said. "That's the working assumption. Before he came in today, he told someone this meeting was happening." "Yes." Donghyun reached into his jacket. "There's more. The surveillance unit. We identified the team. 2 men. They're contracted, not organization. Freelance." He paused. "But the contracting party, the entity that hired them, we traced the payment chain. It's from a shell company, 3 layers deep." He produced a folded paper. "The shell company's ownership connects to a name." He held out the paper. Taejin took it. He unfolded it. He read the name printed at the bottom of the chain. He read it twice. Then he stood in the corridor of his own headquarters with the paper in his hand and understood that the meeting he had just left was not the meeting he had been preparing for. The name on the paper was not Choi Mansik. It was Park Ji-hoon, the head of the Park family, the organization whose shipment had cleared customs 2 days ago clean, whose operation Taejin had been working to manage carefully for 3 months, whose trust he had spent the better part of a year building because the alliance between the Kang and Park syndicates was the single largest piece of strategic leverage the Kang family held in the current configuration of Seoul's underworld. Taejin folded the paper. He held it. He looked at Donghyun. "Park was having us surveilled," he said. The timing is specific. The unit was positioned to document the meeting, Chairman Kang's arrival. Your arrival. Choi's arrival. Donghyun's face was very still. If Park knows that the Kang syndicate is internally fractured, if he has documentation of a confrontation between you, the chairman, and your chief advisor, the leverage shifts. The alliance negotiation that's been running for 3 months collapses, Taejin said, or he uses it. Taejin looked at the wall again. The calculation was already running, the specific kind of rapid-fire strategic thinking that had kept him alive and in power for the better part of a decade. The ability to map a situation's implications 3 moves deep in the time it took other men to identify the problem. He ran it. Park knew about the meeting. Park had positioned surveillance. Park had documentation of internal Kang conflict. That documentation, in the wrong hands or the right ones, depending on perspective, could fracture every relationship the Kang syndicate had built over 30 years. Not just the Park alliance. The downstream effects, the other organizations watching, the hierarchy that depended on the Kang family's appearance of stability, would cascade. And Choi's confirmation came through your private channel, Taejin said. Did he use his own communication line to send it? Donghyun paused. A fractional pause, but real. We'd have to verify the routing. Verify it now. Donghyun moved slightly, reaching for his phone. He made a call, spoke 3 sentences in a low voice, waited. The wait was 90 seconds. He lowered the phone. Choi's confirmation, Donghyun said, was routed through a secondary contact before it hit the private channel. He paused. That secondary contact's communication history shows a connection to the Park family's operational network. The corridor was very quiet. He was already working with Park, Tae-jin said. Not a question. It looks that way. For how long? We don't know yet. Tae-jin looked at the conference room door at the far end of the corridor. Through it, a 62-year-old man sat at a table with his hands folded, looking at evidence of what he had done 6 years ago. And somewhere in the accounting of what he had done, there was apparently a second ledger, a more recent one, with more recent entries, connecting the Kang Syndicate's most trusted internal advisor to the family they were actively negotiating an alliance with. The man in the conference room had not just stolen 6 years of a family's life. He had apparently been selling access to the organization's interior for longer than that, or had begun to, or had offered it once, recently, specifically, in exchange for something Tae-jin did not yet know. Get the surveillance team off the street, Tae-jin said. Quietly. I don't want Park knowing we made them. Done. I need everything on the Park-Choi connection. Every communication, timeline, scope, what was exchanged. He was already moving back toward the conference room. And I need it before I go back in that room. Tae-jin-ah. Dong-yun caught his arm. Not forcefully, just enough to make him stop. If Choi gave Park information about the internal structure of this organization, about the chairman's medical condition, about your situation with the woman and the child, that's not just leverage. That's a vulnerability, a real one. Park could use it to force a negotiation that doesn't favor us. I know. And if you go back in there and push Choi before we understand the full scope, if I don't go back in there, Tae-jin said. He calls someone and the door closes. He held Dong-hyun's gaze. He's already made one call, to whoever positioned that surveillance unit. He may make another. I need him in that room before he does. Dong-hyun released his arm. Tae-jin went back to the conference room door. He put his hand on the handle. He breathed once, slow, deliberate, the way he managed things that needed managing. He opened the door. Choi was still at this table. His hands were still folded. His face had rearranged itself into something composed during the minutes Tae-jin had been gone. The careful attentiveness was back, rebuilt over whatever had been showing through the cracks. He looked up when Tae-jin came in, and his expression was the expression of a man waiting for a conversation to conclude so that whatever came next could begin. That expression told Tae-jin everything he needed to know about how Choi understood the situation. He thought this meeting was the conclusion. He thought Tae-jin had found the 6-year-old story, and that was what today was about. He did not know that Tae-jin had just found the second story. Tae-jin sat back down at the head of the table. He looked at Choi. He looked at him with the same flat diagnostic clarity he had looked at himself in the bathroom mirror 2 mornings ago, and in the recycled air of the windowless room, he let the silence run for 7 seconds before he spoke. Park Ji-hoon, he said. Choi's hands on the table didn't move, but his eyes did. Just slightly. Just the specific microscopic shift of a man whose body has registered a threat before his mind has finished deciding how to respond to it. What about Park? He said. When did you start talking to him? A pause. The pause itself was an answer. I don't know what you think. The surveillance unit across the street, Tae-jin said. 6th floor, east-facing, 2 contractors. Payment chain traced to a Park shell company. Your confirmation for this meeting routed through a secondary contact with connections to the Park operational network. He leaned forward slightly. You have about 30 seconds before this conversation becomes something different from what it was. Choi's face was doing several things in rapid succession: calculation, reassessment, the rapid behind-the-eyes movement of a man running scenarios and finding the exits closing. He looked at the chairman. The old man had not moved, had not changed expression, was simply watching Choi with the patient, terminal attention of someone who has run out of capacity for being surprised by betrayal, but has not run out of capacity for witnessing it. It was one conversation, Choi said. When? 3 months ago. What did you give him? Silence. Mansik, the chairman's voice, quiet and final. What did you give him? Choi looked at the table. At the original records, the 6-year-old records, still spread across it. He looked at the call logs and the intercept architecture and the medical files, and then he looked up, and on his face was the expression of a man standing inside the full scope of what he'd done for the first time, and finding the scope larger than he had previously allowed himself to understand. "I told him about the child," Choi said. The room went very still. "I told him that Taejian had a son, an unacknowledged heir, a child whose existence had been concealed from the organization. I told him that if the situation became public, if the Kang family's internal situation became unstable, the timing of the alliance negotiation would be affected." He stopped. His voice was flat. Not remorseless, flat in the way of a man who has stopped performing and has not yet found what is true underneath the performance. He said he wasn't interested in destabilizing the alliance. He said he just wanted to understand the landscape. "He positioned a surveillance team across the street from our headquarters," Taejian said. "This morning, to document a private confrontation between me, my father, and you. That is not a man who is not interested in destabilizing the alliance." Choi said nothing. "You gave Park leverage over this family," Taejian said. "You told him about my son. You handed him a vulnerability that he then positioned himself to exploit at the exact moment we were most exposed." He stopped. He looked at Choi for a long moment, at the face of the man who had built a lie 6 years ago, and then apparently had handed the lie to an enemy 3 months ago like a key to a door that he had locked himself. "Why? After everything you did to keep Malik hidden, after 6 years of managing that information, why give it to Park?" Choi's jaw worked. "'Cause I thought—" He stopped, breathed. "I thought if I had something Park wanted, he would negotiate terms favorable to us. I thought giving him the information gave us leverage over how he used it." "You thought giving an enemy information about my son was leverage," Taejian said. "I thought it would control the situation." "You thought it would give you a position," Taejian said. "Inside the alliance negotiation, a private channel to Park that I didn't know about. Information he valued that came from you specifically." He looked at the man across the table. "You thought it would make you necessary again." Choi looked at the table. He did not deny it. "Because you knew," Taejian said, "that once I found out what you did 6 years ago, your position in this organization was finished, and you were trying to build an exit before the door closed." The silence was absolute. In it, the chairman made a sound, not a word, not quite, just a short, rough exhalation that carried 30 years of relationship inside it, compressing into a single breath of air that meant everything and nothing and was the last expression of something that was now permanently over. "Get out of this building," Taejian said. Choi looked up. "Right now, stand up. Walk out. You are no longer part of this organization. Your access is revoked as of this moment. Donghyun will meet you in the lobby and recover every piece of Kong property in your possession." He kept his voice level, completely level, because the alternative to level was something that would not serve any of the things he needed to do next. "You will not contact Park. You will not contact anyone inside this organization. You will not use anything you know about this family for any purpose. If you do—" He stopped. "You know what happens if you do." Choi stood up slowly. He straightened his jacket. He looked at the chairman one more time. The old man did not look at him. Choi walked to the door. He put his hand on the handle. He paused with his back to the room, and Taejian watched the set of his shoulders, the particular held quality of someone who has something left to say and is calculating whether saying it costs too much. "I did what I believed was right," Choi said. "To the door. To no one specific. For 30 years, everything I did was for the Kang family, including the things that were wrong." He paused. "I know that doesn't change anything." "No," the chairman said. "It doesn't." Choi opened the door and walked out. The door closed. In the conference room, the records were still spread across the table, the 6-year-old story laid out in its full architecture, the evidence of everything that had been stolen. But now those records were the smaller problem. Now the immediate problem was a man named Park Ji-hoon who had been handed a key and had already moved his people into position. And somewhere across the city, in an apartment in Mapogu, Imani Brooks was going to her shift at Seoul Children's Hospital today, and Malik was going to school, and neither of them knew that the story had just grown a second chapter that had nothing to do with Choi Man-sik, and everything to do with what Choi had traded away in the last desperate move of a man who had seen his own ending. Taejin was out of the conference room before the door finished closing behind Choi. He moved fast down the corridor toward the operations center on the same floor. Not running, because running inside your own headquarters communicated panic, and panic was contagious, but at the kind of controlled speed that told every person he passed that the situation had changed and they needed to be ready for instructions. Dong-hyun fell into step beside him without being called. "Park's surveillance team," Taejin said, low and fast. "Where are they now?" "Still in position as of 4 minutes ago. We pulled back our counter-surveillance to avoid tipping them." "Pull everyone in. Full recall. I want every available man on domestic rotation back at their post within the hour." "That's going to be visible." "Good. I want Park to see us consolidate. I want him to know we identified the unit." He pushed through the operations center door. The room had 6 people in it. Communications, security monitoring, logistics. All of them looked up. Everyone out except Dong-hyun. The room cleared in 18 seconds. Taejin went to the main display and pulled up the city map. Kang Syndicate positions marked in blue. Park family positions, as best they knew them, in gray. The surveillance unit across the street was a red dot, newly placed on the map by Dong-hyun's team, precise to the room. He looked at the map for 30 seconds. "Park's been sitting on this information for 3 months," he said. "He's had 90 days to build a play. The question is what the play is. He could go public with the internal conflict, leak it to rival organizations. That destabilizes the entire ecosystem, including Park's own position. He doesn't want chaos. He wants leverage." Taejin traced a line on the map with 2 fingers. "He wants to renegotiate the alliance terms. He wants a better deal. He wants the kind of concessions that a Kang family publicly exposed as fractured would be forced to accept. So this is a negotiating move. This is a threat that precedes a negotiating move. He documents the meeting, he sits on the footage, and then he calls me and suggests we revisit the terms we've been discussing for 3 months. Taejin looked at the red dot. That call was probably going to come today, after the meeting ended, after he had the footage secured. Dong-hyun was quiet for a moment. If he calls and you don't answer, he escalates. He makes the next move. Taejin's jaw was tight. I need to know what he has, not what he filmed this morning, what Choi gave him, the full scope of it. We may not have time to build that picture completely before his phone rang. He looked at the screen. Park Ji-hoon. He looked at Dong-hyun. Dong-hyun's face was flat and watchful. Taejin picked up. Park si say, he said. Kang Taejin. Park's voice was easy, unhurried, the voice of a man who was comfortable with the space he was occupying. I hope the morning hasn't been too difficult. The morning's been fine. Good. Good. A pause that was not awkward, deliberately shaped. The kind of pause a man inserted when he wanted you to feel the weight of what he wasn't saying yet. I was hoping we could meet, in person, this week, if possible. I think there are some aspects of our arrangement that would benefit from a direct conversation. We have a meeting scheduled for next Thursday. I was thinking sooner than that. How soon? Today, Park said. This afternoon, if you're available. I realize it's short notice, but I think you'll agree, once we're sitting across from each other, that the timing makes sense. Taejin kept his eyes on the map. On the red dot, on the blue positions of his own men, spread across the city in their daily configurations, not yet recalled, not yet consolidated. He ran the calculation. If he refused, Park escalated. If he agreed and walked in without knowing the full scope of what Park held, he negotiated blind. Neither option was clean. 3 o'clock, Taejin said. Neutral location. I'll send you the address. Of course. The ease in Park's voice did not change. I look forward to it. The call ended. Taejin put the phone down on the display table. He looked at the map. He looked at the red dot and the blue positions and the gray marks of everything he knew and didn't know about the Park family's reach. And he breathed once. Not slowly, not deliberately. Just the involuntary breath of a man whose body was processing the specific weight of an impossible timeline. 2 hours, he said to Dong-hyun. I need everything you can build on Park's position in 2 hours. Every conversation Choi could have had with him. Every piece of Kong information that could have changed hands. I need to know what I'm walking into. 2 hours isn't... It's what we have. Donghyun nodded and moved. Taejin picked up his phone and looked at it. He opened his messages. Imani's last text was from this morning. A photo of Malik at breakfast, unsolicited, sent at 7:40 with no caption, just the image. The boy eating cereal with the focused intensity of someone who treated all tasks with equal seriousness. He typed, "Something came up. I need you to stay inside today. You and Malik. Don't go to the hospital. Don't go anywhere. I'll explain when I can." He sent it and put the phone in his pocket before she could reply, because he did not have the bandwidth right now for what her reply was going to be. Done. She called him 40 seconds later. He answered because not answering would have been worse. "Explain now," she said. "Imani, I have a shift at 11. I have patience. Explain now or I am walking out the door." He moved into the corridor where the operations center's sound didn't bleed through. He kept his voice low and level and gave her the minimum necessary version of the truth. Park, the surveillance, the information Choi had sold, the fact that Park now had documentation connecting Malik's existence to the Kang family's internal situation and would not hesitate to use it as leverage. Silence on her end. "He knows about Malik," she said. "Yes. By name." Possibly, Choi knew the name. Another silence. Shorter. The silence of a woman rapidly running her own calculation with the specific quality of someone who had been operating alone in high-stakes situations for 6 years and had developed the competence for it. What does he actually want? Park. Better terms on the alliance, concessions. He wants a Kang family that's negotiating from a weaker position than we were last week. And if you give him the concessions, he has no reason to expose Malik's existence publicly, but he keeps the footage. He keeps the leverage. It becomes a permanent feature of our relationship with the Park family. Every negotiation going forward, he holds the card. "That's not a solution," she said. "That's a subscription." "I know. So don't give him the concessions." "If I don't, I know what if you don't means," she said. Her voice was sharp and controlled, and he could hear in it the quality he had recognized in her from the first time they argued 6 years ago. The refusal to be managed, the absolute rejection of any version of events that required her to be a passive element in someone else's strategy. "What do you need from me?" "Stay inside. Keep Malik." "I heard that part. What do you need from me?" He paused. He stood in the corridor of his own headquarters with the city map in his head and Park's voice still in his ear and his son's face on his phone screen, and thought about what he actually needed from her, and the answer that came up was not the tactical one. "I need you to trust me for about 4 hours, he said. "I know I haven't given you reason to, but I need—" "You have 4 hours, she said. "Then I'm calling you." She hung up. He stood in the corridor for 3 seconds. Then he went back to work. The location he sent to Park was a private dining room in a hotel in Junggu. Neutral in the sense that neither family owned it, public enough that neither side would make a move that created witnesses, and closed enough for a conversation that required containment. He arrived 30 minutes early with Donghyun and 2 men who positioned themselves with the specific unobtrusive competence of people who had done this many times. Donghyun had built what he could in 2 hours. It was not enough, and it was more than nothing. The Park Choi communication channel appeared to go back approximately 4 months, longer than Choi had admitted, which surprised no one. What Choi had given Park was substantial: the chairman's medical status, the real degree of physical limitation the stroke had imposed. The ongoing succession question, whether Taejin's authority was fully consolidated, or whether the chairman's condition had created internal tension about leadership. And Malik, the child's existence, the circumstances, the 6-year concealment, and the fact that the confrontation with Choi was imminent. Park had known this confrontation was coming before Taejin had scheduled it. He had positioned his team in advance. He had been ready. Taejin sat at the private dining table with this information arranged inside him like the pieces of a map he was reading in real time, and he waited. And at 3 o'clock exactly the door opened and Park Ji-hoon walked in. He was 60 years old and moved like a man who had spent those 60 years making other men uncomfortable with how comfortable he was. He was broad through the shoulders and had a stillness to his physicality that was not peace but its opposite, the stillness of something that was ready to move very suddenly in any direction. He came with 2 men of his own, who took positions near the door, and he sat down across from Tae-jin with the ease of a man sitting in his own office. Kang Tae-jin, he said, you look well. You had a busy morning, Tae-jin said. Park smiled, not with his eyes. I keep close watch on my business interests. You understand? I do. Tae-jin folded his hands on the table. He looked at Park with the same diagnostic flatness he had looked at Choi 4 hours ago. You have footage of a private meeting in my headquarters this morning. You have documentation of an internal organizational matter. And you've come to this table because you believe that documentation gives you a different position than the one you occupied yesterday. Park tilted his head slightly. Direct. I appreciate that. Then I'll stay direct. Tell me what you want. What I want, Park said slowly, is a partnership built on a realistic assessment of both families' current situations. Not the situation as it existed 6 months ago. The current situation. He let that sit for a moment. Your father is significantly more limited than your organization has publicly acknowledged. The succession question is real, and you have a personal situation that, if it became known within the broader community, would raise questions about your judgment and your family's stability. My son, Tae-jin said. Park paused, just slightly. He had not expected the word to come out that flatly, that quickly, with that much ownership behind it. An unacknowledged child, Park said, with a foreign woman, kept from the organization for 6 years. The circumstances of the concealment, my son, Tae-jin said again. You will call him that, or you will call him nothing. The temperature in the room shifted. Not dramatically. The way temperature shifted in a room with climate control. Something subtle and comprehensive that you registered in your skin before your mind caught up. Park's 2 men near the door adjusted their weight slightly. Dong-hyun did not move. Park looked at Tae-jin for a moment. Your son, he said, without the edge this time. An acknowledgement, or a concession, or a test of what Tae-jin would do with it. What you have on film this morning, Tae-jin said, is a family confronting a man who betrayed them. You have documentation of a Kang family that identified a problem and removed it. That is not weakness. That is how an organization stays clean. He held Park's gaze. What you're holding as leverage is evidence that we handle our internal matters decisively. Think carefully about whether that's the card you want to play. Park leaned back slightly. He looked at Tae-jin with the expression of a man recalibrating. Not retreating, not committing, just recalibrating. The alliance terms, he said, as they stand, there are aspects that favor the Kang family significantly in the first 3 years. I want to revisit the revenue distribution in the Incheon corridor. The Incheon terms were negotiated over 4 months, and circumstances change. He spread his hands. I'm not asking for the world. I'm asking for a conversation about adjustment. You're asking for a conversation with a gun on the table. The gun is there whether we name it or not, Park said. I'd rather have the conversation honestly. Tae-jin looked at him. He looked at the space between them on the table, the empty space where the gun that was not a gun sat in plain sight. He ran the map in his head again, the downstream effects, the permanent subscription of leverage, the choice that was not clean and had no version that was clean, and required him to decide right now which kind of damage he was willing to absorb. His phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. He did not reach for it. It buzzed again. Something in his chest went cold in a specific way. Not the cold of strategy, but the cold of instinct, the kind that operated below calculation. He reached for the phone. Imani. Calling, not texting. She had said 4 hours. It had been 2. Excuse me, he said to Park. He kept his voice level. He looked at Dong-hyun as he stood, a look that communicated, stay, watch, do not let Park's men move. He stepped to the far corner of the room and answered, Imani, someone came to the apartment building. Her voice was very controlled. Too controlled. The control of someone managing active fear with both hands. 20 minutes ago, 2 men in the lobby. They told the desk they were here for a delivery for Dr. Brooks. The desk called up, and I didn't answer, and I watched on the building camera, and they stayed in the lobby for 10 minutes, and then they left. His jaw locked. Where are you right now? Inside. Malik is with me. We're inside. A pause. They had photographs. The desk manager described it. They showed her a photograph of Malik. They were asking if this was the child of the woman in apartment. Stop, he said. Don't say your apartment number on this call. Go to your interior bathroom. Take Malik. Lock the door. Do not open it for anyone until I call you from this exact number. Tejin, now, he said. Quiet, final. I am calling someone to get to you. Do not open the door. He hung up. He turned back to the room. Park was watching him. Something in Park's expression was careful, too careful. The expression of a man watching a reaction he had anticipated. Taejin stood at the far end of the room and looked at Park Ji-hoon across the empty space of the private dining room and understood something with a clarity that arrived all at once, without warning, the way real understanding always arrived. Not built, not reasoned, just suddenly and completely there. Park had not sent the men to Amani's building to hurt anyone. Not yet. Not directly. He had sent them to make a point, to demonstrate the reach of the information Choi had provided, to show Taejin, in real time, in this meeting, that the leverage was not abstract. It was breathing. It was standing in a lobby with photographs. It was 2 minutes away from his son. Call them off, Taejin said. The room went absolutely silent. Park said nothing. Whatever you sent to her building, Taejin said. He crossed back toward the table. He did not sit down. He stood at the end of it and looked at Park with something in his eyes that had nothing to do with strategy anymore, and everything to do with what happened when you stripped a man's calculation down to its last layer and found the thing underneath that did not negotiate. Call them off. Right now. In this room. In front of me. Park looked at him. He looked at him for a long, measured moment, the way a man looked at a calculation he had been confident in and was now finding required adjustment. The men I may or may not have near the Mapogu district, he said carefully, are simply, they are near my son, Taejin said. The word landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Not your son in the dismissive sense, not the earlier flat declarative. This was different. This was the word coming out of a place in him that had not existed 3 days ago, or had existed and been sealed off and was now open and raw and had no professional surface over it. None. And he was standing in front of an enemy with it fully exposed, and he did not care. Park looked at him. And in Park Ji-hoon's expression, in the face of a man who had spent 60 years reading rooms and men and the specific gravity of moments, something shifted. Not sympathy, not retreat, something more like recognition. The recognition of a man who had children of his own and understood, below every calculation, what it looked like when you had reached the thing that was past strategy. One call, Taejin said. Low. Make it. Park reached into his jacket. He took out his phone. He made a call that lasted 11 seconds. He put the phone down on the table. They're leaving the area, he said. Taejin called Dong-hyun, turned halfway away from the table, spoke 2 sentences. Men moving toward Mapogu. Cover on the building until further notice. He put his phone away. He looked at the table, at the space between himself and Park. You want the Incheon corridor terms revisited, Taejin said. His voice had come back to its operational register. Level, flat, precise. Specific numbers. Give me specific numbers. Park looked at him for another moment. Then he leaned forward and named a figure. It was aggressive. It was not impossible. Taejin sat down. Here's what I'll do, he said. I'll give you the first-year Incheon adjustment, half of what you're asking. In exchange, every copy of this morning's footage, every file, every backup, is destroyed in my presence before I leave this room. That's a significant ask. You made a significant move. The footage was insurance. The footage is a liability, Taejin said. Because if you hold it, I spend the next 3 years building a position from which I no longer need the alliance at all. And then the footage becomes irrelevant, and you've spent 3 years in a relationship with a man who is planning his exit from it. He held Park's gaze. Or you take what I'm offering today, we close this, and we run a legitimate operation together for the next decade. Those are the options. Park looked at him. He looked at him for a long time. Then he looked at one of his men near the door and gave a short nod. The man produced a tablet. Park took it. He opened a file application, located a folder, and turned the tablet to face Taejin. Taejin looked at the folder. The footage from the morning surveillance. Multiple files, time-stamped. Park selected all of them. In your presence, Park said. Yes. Park deleted the files. He then opened the cloud backup and deleted from there. He handed the tablet to Taejin. Taejin examined the deletion record, confirmed the timestamps, handed it to Donghyun, who spent 90 seconds verifying. Clean, Donghyun said. The team that was positioned this morning, Taejin said to Park. Their footage. They shoot to my server. What you just watched me delete was the server archive. If anything surfaces, it won't. Park sat back. Something in his posture had changed, not softened, but settled. The posture of a man who had gotten a portion of what he came for and had decided the portion was sufficient. I'm not interested in destroying you, Kang Tae-jin. I'm interested in a profitable relationship with a stable partner. Then we have an understanding. We have an understanding. They looked at each other across the table. Two men in a private dining room in Junggu, the city moving outside around them, the entire weight of what had just happened sitting in the space between them like a thing that would never be spoken about again and would also never entirely leave the room. Taejin stood. Park stood. They did not shake hands. That was not the convention here. They nodded, once each, the acknowledgement of men who had just done something that required no ceremony. Taejin walked to the door. Donghyun was beside him. The two Park men moved aside. In the corridor outside, moving fast toward the exit, Taejin took out his phone and called Imani. She picked up on the first ring. It's done, he said. The men are gone. Donghyun's people are outside your building. A silence. The sound of a bathroom's particular quiet. Small, enclosed, a child's breathing in the background. Malik fell asleep, she said. Her voice had come down from the controlled register, but only partially. On the bathroom floor. Against my shoulder. He thinks we're playing a game. Something in Taejin's chest contracted so hard he nearly stopped walking. I'm coming to you, he said. You don't have to. I'm coming, he said. Imani, I'm coming. Another silence. Shorter. Okay, she said. He walked out of the hotel into the Seoul afternoon, the city loud and indifferent around him, traffic and wind and the specific gray-gold light of late afternoon falling across the streets. And he got in the car, and the car moved, and he sat in the back with his hands loose in his lap, and his jaw locked, and behind his eyes the image of a small boy asleep on a bathroom floor with his mother's shoulder under his cheek, wearing a silver phoenix pendant, waiting for the world to be safe again. The car moved through Junggu toward Mapogu, and Taejin looked out at the city he had run for 20 years and thought about what it had cost, and what it had taken from people who had not agreed to pay the cost, and what it meant that the price had been collected from a 5-year-old who talked about birds and drew families with blank spaces in them and had spent his whole short life not knowing that somewhere in the city his father had been waiting without knowing he was at her building in 19 minutes. Dongyun's men were already there, 2 of them, unremarkable, positioned at the building entrance with the specific quality of stillness that trained people had when they were working. They clocked Taejin as he came through and moved aside without a word. He went through the lobby and into the elevator and pressed the button for her floor and stood in the small mirrored box of it and looked at his own reflection and did not recognize precisely the man looking back. He looked like himself. Same face, same suit, same composed arrangement of features that he had spent 20 years learning to maintain under pressure. But something behind the eyes was different. Something had moved there that had not been there before 3 days ago. Not softer exactly. More like a window had been opened in a room that had been sealed for a long time, and the air coming through it was neither comfortable nor easy, but was, undeniably, air. The elevator opened. He walked to her door and knocked. Silence for a moment. Then her voice, close to the door. Who is it? Me, he said. The lock turned. The door opened. She was still in the clothes she'd been wearing when she called him. Dark scrubs, the cardigan, hair pulled back from a morning that had not gone the way mornings were supposed to go. She looked at him in the doorway with the assessing gaze she always turned on him when she was deciding something, and then she stepped back to let him in. The apartment was the same as it had been that morning. Small, clean, Malik's drawings on the refrigerator, the particular organized quality of a space maintained by a woman who had learned that order was a form of control she could actually exercise. The bathroom door at the far end of the hall was open now. The lights were on. He's on the couch, she said, still asleep. Taejin moved to the entrance of the living room and looked. Malik was on his side on the couch with a blanket pulled up to his chin, one small hand visible, the silver phoenix pendant caught at an angle against the pillow. His face in sleep was the face of a child entirely at rest. The arguments and the birds and the card games with invented rules all suspended. Just the clean, uncomplicated stillness of a boy who trusted the people around him to manage the world while he slept. Taejin looked at him for a long time. Then he went back to the kitchen where Amani was standing with her arms crossed and her back against the counter, watching him. "Tell me everything," she said. He told her. He sat across from her at the small kitchen table and laid it out in sequence. Park, the surveillance, Choi's secondary betrayal, the meeting in Junggu, the men in her lobby, the negotiation, the deleted footage. He told her all of it with the same flat factual delivery he had used on Choi in the conference room that morning because she had asked for honesty, and the most honest thing he knew how to give her was the complete version without the editorial. She listened without interrupting, which was harder than it looked. He could see the effort of it in her jaw. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "He sold information about Malik," she said, "to someone outside your organization." "Yes. That man sat in a room today and admitted to you that he intercepted 6 years of our lives and then, at some point in the last few months, sold the secret he'd created to someone who used it to send men to my building with photographs of my son." "Yes." She exhaled. It was a long exhale, the kind that had a great deal of weight in it. She looked at the table, at her own hands on it. "Is it over?" she said. "The Park situation. The immediate threat is resolved. The footage is gone. We have an adjusted alliance agreement. Park got something he wanted, and he won't move against us because it's not in his interest. A destabilized Kang family is worth less to him than a functional partnership." He paused. "It's not over in the sense that the world we're adjacent to is never fully over. But the specific danger to you and Malik is resolved." "Adjacent to," she said. She looked at him. "That's a careful way to put it. It's accurate." "Taejin." She said his name in the way she had been saying it since the cafeteria 2 days ago. Direct, without ceremony, the way she said everything. "I need to know something, and I need you to answer me without thinking about how the answer lands." "All right. Is this going to keep happening?" she said. "Not this specifically, but something like this. Men in lobbies, photographs of my son. Someone using Malik's existence as a bargaining chip in a negotiation I don't know is happening." She held his gaze. "Because if the answer is yes, if this is the permanent condition of being connected to your family, then I need to know that now. Before any of this goes further. Before Malik gets any more attached to a grandfather and a father than he already is." The question sat in the kitchen between them. It was the most important question she could have asked, and she had asked it precisely, and it deserved an answer of equal precision. "I can't promise nothing will ever happen again," he said. "I can promise that what happened today won't happen the same way again, because the vulnerability that allowed it, Choi, the information he held, the access he had, is gone. The specific exposure is closed." He paused. "I can promise that protecting you and Malik will be the first calculation I make in every decision going forward. Not one of the calculations, the first one. That's not the same as safe." "No," he said. "It's not." She looked at him. She looked at him for long enough that he felt the full weight of what was being evaluated. Not just the last 3 days, not just the answer he'd just given, but the entire accumulated evidence of what kind of man he was, and whether that man was something she could choose to trust with the most important things she had. "Okay," she said. "Okay." "Don't make me regret that," she said. "I won't," he said, and meant it with the specific totality of a man who understood for the first time what it meant to have something to lose that was not power or position or the respect of dangerous people, but something real. Something that breathed and dreamed on a couch, in the next room, wearing a phoenix pendant. He stayed that afternoon. She did not ask him to, and she did not ask him to leave, which was the kind of permission that fit the precise size of what they were. Not restored, not resolved, but moving towards something in the slow, careful way of people who had been hurt by the same wound from different directions and were figuring out whether they could stand in the same room without making it worse. When Malik woke up at 4:30, he came into the kitchen still half asleep, hair sideways, blanket dragging behind him, and stopped in the doorway when he saw Taejun at the table. He looked at him for a moment with the processing expression of a child whose brain was completing its restart. Then he sat down in the chair beside him without being invited and put his chin in his hands and said, "You're still here." "Yes." "Mom made you stay?" "No." Malik considered this. "You wanted to stay?" "Yes." The boy nodded slowly, in the manner of someone whose hypothesis had been confirmed. "I thought so," he said. He reached across the table and picked up the glass of water that had been in front of Tae-jin and drank from it with the complete unself-consciousness of a child who had decided that property lines were a flexible concept between people he trusted. He put the glass down. "Can you stay for dinner?" Imani, at the stove with her back to them, said nothing, which was also a kind of answer. "If that's all right," Tae-jin said. "It's all right," Malik said firmly, with the authority of a 5-year-old who had decided the matter was settled. He slid off the chair and went to get his backpack from the hallway, and came back and sat down again and began removing schoolwork from it, spreading it across the table with cheerful disregard for the glass, the napkins, and all other existing table geography. He came to a worksheet about shapes and looked at it, and then looked at Tae-jin. "Do you know what a rhombus is?" "Yes." "Good." He pushed the worksheet across. "Help me." Tae-jin looked at the worksheet. He looked at his son's face, the focused, earnest, completely unguarded expression of a child who had decided someone was useful and was therefore putting them to use. He picked up the pencil Malik pushed at him. He helped with the rhombus. But the dinner was simple. Imani cooked without ceremony, rice, a stew, the particular efficiency of a woman who fed a child alone every night and had refined the process to its essential elements. She did not perform the cooking, and she did not ask Tae-jin to admire it. She put the food on the table and they sat, and Malik ate with the focused intensity he brought to all tasks, and talked about a boy at school named Jinho, who had argued that dinosaurs were not interesting, a position Malik considered not only wrong, but aggressively wrong, and he laid out his counter-argument in considerable detail. Tae-jin listened. He asked questions at the right moments, not to perform interest, but because the questions occurred to him, and he asked them. When Malik's argument reached its conclusion and verdict was declared against Jinho, Tae-jin said, "What kind of dinosaur do you think is most interesting?" Malik looked at him like this was a test. "You first," he said. "Pachycephalosaurus," Tae-jin said. Malik's eyes went wide. "The head-bashing one." "The head-bashing one." "That's a good answer," Malik said, with the gravity of a serious judge delivering a considered ruling. "Mine is Spinosaurus, because it could swim and also be scary on land. That's 2 kinds of scary. Most things are only 1 kind." Across the table, Imani was looking at her stew. Something at the corner of her mouth was doing a thing she was not quite preventing. After dinner, Malik was given 30 minutes of what he called free time, and what Imani called the period before bath time, during which chaos was theoretically bounded. He deployed the 30 minutes by bringing out a set of colored pencils and his sketch pad and settling at the coffee table in the living room, and Tae-jin moved to the couch, and the boy drew with the total absorption of someone for whom this was not a pastime but a requirement of existence. Imani washed dishes in the kitchen, the sound of water, the ordinary sound of an evening proceeding the way evenings proceeded. After 10 minutes, Malik held up what he'd been drawing without looking up from the page. "Does this look right?" Tae-jin looked at the drawing. It was the family portrait, the same composition he had seen on the refrigerator, the same mother figure and small self-portrait. But the blank space was no longer blank. There was a figure there now, roughly rendered in pencil, tall, standing beside the others. It did not look exactly like Tae-jin. Children's drawings did not work that way, but it was present. It had mass and intention, and it was standing in the space that had been empty. "Yes," Tae-jin said. "It looks right." Malik nodded and went back to refining it. He added detail, a specific collar on the tall figure, something at the figure's neck that with some imagination could be read as the family crest. He worked with the pencil in the focused way he did everything, his tongue at the corner of his mouth. Tae-jin sat on the couch and watched his son draw and did not move for a long time. He left after the bath time and bedtime process, which he witnessed from the doorway of Malik's room. The specific and apparently non-negotiable ritual of 2 books read aloud, a glass of water on the nightstand, and a brief but serious argument about whether the hall light should be fully on or halfway on,
adjudicated by Imani with the weary expertise of someone who had run this negotiation 400 times. Malik's position was halfway on. He prevailed. He usually prevailed. Taejin suspected on this particular issue. Imani came to the front door. She leaned against the wall beside it with her arms loose at her sides for once. Not crossed, not braced. A small thing. He noticed it. "He's going to ask you to come back tomorrow," she said. "I'll come." "I know." She looked at the door. "He showed me the drawing when you were in the bathroom." She paused. "He asked me if I thought the tall figure looked like you. I said yes." Another pause. "He said he was going to color it tomorrow. He wanted to know what color jacket you usually wear." Taejin looked at her, at the composed, careful, deliberately maintained face of a woman who had learned to carry everything alone and was in the slow and deeply uncomfortable process of learning that she might not have to anymore. The discomfort was visible. The learning was visible. Both were visible in the specific way they were visible when a person stopped performing and just stood in a doorway at the end of a very long day and was simply what they were. "Charcoal," he said. "The jacket." She nodded. She would tell Malik tomorrow. She filed it the way she filed everything, directly, without fuss. He went to the door. He put his hand on the handle. He stopped. "Imani," he said. She looked at him. "I know I can't." He started. He stopped. He started again, and this time he did not try to make it land cleanly, because clean landings were not the honest ones. "I know there isn't a version of an apology that covers it. I know that. I know that what was taken from you wasn't just time with me. It was everything you carried alone that you shouldn't have had to carry alone. The pregnancy. His first years. Every decision you made by yourself that should have had two people making it." He looked at her. "I'm not asking you to accept an apology. I'm telling you that I know the accounting, and I know what I owe, and I know you don't owe me any of what I hope for." He stopped. "That's all." She looked at him for a long moment. Her jaw was doing the thing Malik had described, the controlled thing, the managing what she felt thing, but her eyes were clear. "Go home, Taejin," she said. "Come back tomorrow." "Yes," he said. He went. The weeks that followed were not cinematic. That was the thing about the aftermath of crises. They did not resolve into clean, transformed versions of what had come before. They resolved into ordinary time, which was harder in different ways. Taejin came back the next day, and the day after. Not always for dinner, sometimes just for an hour in the afternoon. Homework at the kitchen table. Malik's running commentary on the state of the world. He learned the rhombus worksheet. He learned that Jinho had eventually conceded the dinosaur argument under sustained pressure. He learned that Malik preferred his rice in a specific bowl, and that he had opinions about how pencils should be sharpened, and that he would not discuss his feelings directly but would draw them immediately and without reserve, which was its own language and one Taejin learned to read. He learned to show up. That was the primary task, and it was simpler than every other task he had spent his life performing, and also harder than any of them, because showing up required nothing except presence, and presence was not a skill he had ever developed. He had spent 20 years being the absent center of things, the authority that did not need to be in the room because the room rearranged itself around the fact of him. This was different. This required him to actually be there, in the specific small way of sitting beside a child while the child drew, of answering the question about birds, of losing the card game with invented rules because losing was apparently also part of what presence required. He lost. Sometimes deliberately. Once accidentally, Malik had genuinely outwitted him on a rule Taejin had not tracked correctly, and the boy's expression when he realized the win was real was the expression of a person who had achieved something that mattered, and Taejin felt something in response to that expression that he had no previous language for and did not try to name. He called the hospital. He arranged to meet Amani's department head, not to use his position, which he made clear in the specific way that actually made it clear, which was to arrive without his usual people and to wait in the regular waiting area and to shake hands without making the handshake a demonstration of anything. The department head was a cautious woman named Dr. Lim, who had clearly done her research before the meeting and regarded him with the specific wariness of someone assessing a variable they had not previously had to account for. He did not try to remove the wariness.
He simply told her that Imani was the best physician in her unit and that he was Malik's father and that he wanted to know what kind of support the hospital needed to ensure that both of them were stable and safe. And then he listened. Doctor. Lim talked for 20 minutes and he listened to all of it and asked 2 questions and said he would be in touch. He was in touch. Things were arranged. He did not announce them to Imani. Donghyun handled the security arrangements in a way that was thorough and invisible, and when Imani noticed the change in the building's lobby, coverage 2 weeks later, she called him and he confirmed it, and she was quiet for a moment and said, "Thank you." And he said, "It's already done." And they did not discuss it further. Chairman Kang was discharged from Hanseong Medical Center in the 3rd week of November. He went home to the family residence in Seongbuk-dong, which had been modified during his stay to accommodate the chair and the medical equipment and the rotating care team. The house was large and had always felt large in the specific way of spaces occupied by too few people with too much unsaid between them. He had lived in it alone, effectively, since Taejin's mother died. Malik visited for the first time on a Saturday. Taejin drove them. Imani in the front seat, Malik in the back, asking questions about where they were going and whether the house was big and whether there would be anything to eat, and the question about food was apparently the most pressing one because it recurred twice before they arrived. Imani answered all questions with the composed patience she brought to Malik's operational inquiries, and Taejin drove and listened and said nothing, which was also a kind of participation he was learning. The house was large. Malik registered this immediately and responded to it the way he responded to most large spaces, with the instinct to understand its full dimensions, which meant he needed to move through it. Taejin's head of household staff, a woman who had been with the family for 22 years and had seen many things, showed Malik the ground floor with the patient attention of someone who had identified the situation correctly and was responding to it appropriately. Imani followed at a slight distance, taking in the house with the careful observational quality she turned on everything, not performing assessment, just noting, cataloging, understanding what kind of world her son was going to be adjacent to. Chairman Kang was in the main sitting room in the chair, positioned near the window where the afternoon light came in at a low angle that suited him. He heard Malik before he saw him, the sound of a child discovering a hallway that had an echo and investigating the echo's full range of possibility. He looked up when Malik appeared in the doorway, with the head of household staff behind him and Imani behind her and Taejin at the back. Malik saw him and his whole face changed, lit from somewhere internal, the genuine, uncomplicated gladness of a child seeing a person he had chosen to love. "Hospital Grandpa," he said. He crossed the room in the unself-conscious way he moved everywhere and came to the chair and without particular ceremony took the old man's right hand in both of his and looked at him with the serious appraisal of someone checking on something important. "Your hand looks the same," he announced. "It is the same," the chairman said. His voice was rough, and his eyes were doing several things simultaneously that his face had not been designed to conceal. "I've been drawing you," Malik said. He turned to his mother with the expectant expression of someone who had delegated item transport. Imani reached into her bag and produced a folded piece of paper, which she held out. Malik took it and presented it to the chairman with both hands, in the specific formal gesture of a child who understood that some things required ceremony. Chairman Kang unfolded it with his right hand, slowly. He looked at it. A garden scene, 2 figures, one in a chair, one cross-legged on the ground. Between them, the spread of a card game. The sky rendered in blue pencil, the plants in green, the wheelchair in careful detail, its wheels painstakingly round. The old man looked at the drawing for a long time. "Little General," he said finally. "Yes," Malik said. "This is very good." "I know," Malik said, without false modesty. He settled himself on the footstool near the chair with the ease of someone resuming a familiar arrangement. "I brought the cards. We can play. But you have to remember that last time I was winning." "I remember," the chairman said. "Good." Malik began producing cards from his pocket with the air of a person who came prepared. "Also, Mom says I have to be careful of your hand, so I'm going to deal for both of us." "That seems fair," the chairman said. Taejin stood in the doorway of his childhood home's sitting room and watched his father and his son negotiate the terms of their card game, and beside him, Imani stood with her arms not crossed for once, her hands loose at her sides, watching the same thing. He felt her presence the way he felt temperature or the quality of light. as a fact of the room, real and specific. He did not reach for her hand. It was not the moment for that. The moment for that would come when it came, and it would come in its own time, in the slow, unfussy way that things between them had always moved, not toward performance, but toward truth, which was the longer road but the one that held. She was thinking something. He could tell from the quality of her stillness. "What?" he said quietly. She looked at the two of them in the room, the old man and the boy with the cards. She looked at them for another moment. "I spent 6 years," she said, equally quiet, "telling myself that the reason I came back to Seoul was the job, that it was practical, that it was about Malik's future and not about anything else." She paused. "I don't think that was completely true." He looked at her. "I think I came back because I never finished believing," she said. "Even after everything. I never got all the way to finished." She looked at the window, at the garden that would be bare in November, but showed the structure of itself, the bones of things, the arrangement beneath the season. "I think that's probably the most embarrassing thing I've ever admitted to anyone." "No," he said. "It's not." She looked at him. "I told myself I was past it," he said. "For 6 years I told myself that was a closed door, that I had made peace with it, and moved on, and the peace was real." He looked at the room, at the old man laughing at something Malik had said, at the boy dealing cards with focused ceremony, at the afternoon light crossing the floor of a house that had been too empty for too long. "I left the light on," he said. She looked at him. A real look. The kind she gave when she was not managing what she saw. "Kong Taejin," she said. "Yes?" "That's the most you've ever said about any of this." "I know." "It only took 6 years." "I know." Something moved in her expression. Not the thing she was managing, Sok. The actual thing underneath, the thing that had been there in the lobby of the hospital when she turned and saw him. The thing she had been containing with both hands since. It moved across her face, and she let it, just briefly, before the composure came back. "One thing at a time," she said. "Yes," he said. "Don't rush it." "I won't." She nodded once, the nod of a woman who had made a decision and was putting it into practice. She moved toward the sitting room, toward her son and the grandfather who had claimed him in the card game with its invented rules. Taejin followed. A month later, a private dinner. A restaurant in Gangnam that the Kang family used for occasions that required both privacy and the specific quality of attention that signaled to the people inside the room that they were worth the care. A round table. 4 chairs. Chairman Kang at Malik's right, which Malik had arranged himself by the simple method of standing next to the chair. He wanted the old man in and waiting for the seating to organize itself around his intention. Imani across from the chairman. Taejin between his father and the empty 4th chair, which Malik eventually occupied after he had inspected the table, the chairs, the view from the window, and the menu, which he had asked to see because he had opinions. They ate. The conversation moved the way conversation moved between people who had earned the right to be in a room together. Not smooth, not performed, but real. Malik explained to the chairman that Spinosaurus had recently been confirmed by new research to be primarily aquatic, which elevated its status considerably. The chairman listened with the gravity the subject deserved. Imani and Taejin spoke at the edges of each other's sentences in the way of people who had been navigating the same space long enough to know each other's rhythm. At the end of the meal, after the plates were cleared and the table held only water glasses and the remnants of the evening, Malik looked around at the 3 of them with the contemplative expression he wore when a significant thought was being processed. "When you and Mom get married," he said to Taejin. The table went quiet. Malik was not embarrassed. He looked at Taejin with the patient expression of someone who had raised a topic he expected to be addressed. Taejin looked at Imani. Imani was looking at the water glass in front of her with the specific quality of someone whose face was doing the managing thing with great intensity. "When that happens," Malik continued, with the serene confidence of a child who had never considered the possibility that the premise was uncertain, "I want to carry the rings, not throw flowers, rings." He paused. "Flowers are fine for other people, but rings are more important." The chairman made a sound. It was supposed to be neutral. It was not neutral. Taejin looked at his father, whose expression was doing something that the old man was also attempting to manage with uneven success. "We'll discuss it," Tejin said. "I'm available," Malik said immediately. "I know you are." "Good." Malik picked up his water glass and drank from it with satisfaction. He looked out the window at the Seoul skyline. The city lit against the dark, buildings stacked against each other the way they had always been, the argument of it ongoing and unresolved and brilliant. "It's a good city," he said. "I looked at it from the other building and it looked different, but from here it looks good." "It's better from here," the chairman said. "Yeah." Malik set the glass down. He reached up with one hand and adjusted the phoenix pendant at his throat. A gesture of pure habit, the unconscious touch of a child who had worn a thing long enough that it was part of how his body understood itself. "We should come here again." "We will," Tejin said. "Promise?" He looked at his son, at the clear, serious eyes, the dimple, the patient authority of a child waiting for an adult to mean what he said. "Yes," Tejin said. "I promise." Malik accepted this. He looked around the table one more time, his mother, his grandfather, his father, with the expression of a child conducting an inventory of what he had, finding it complete, and deciding this was sufficient cause for satisfaction. Then he picked up the dessert menu and applied to it the same focused scrutiny he applied to everything that mattered. Outside, Seoul went on doing what Seoul did, burning through its contradictions, building and rebuilding, the river running through it the way it had always run, indifferent to everything and containing everything, all of it lit up against the dark. The silver phoenix on Malik's chest caught the light from the window and held it. It had traveled a long way to get here, from the hands of an artisan to a woman's neck to a child's small chest, through 6 years of a story that had no right to end the way it ended, which was to say, around a table, with food, with laughter that was not performed, with an old man who had reclaimed something he did not know he had lost, with a woman who had carried more than she should have carried and set enough of it down to have both hands free, with a man who had spent 20 years building a life of control around a locked room and had finally opened the door. Not a clean ending, not a story that had resolved its debts easily or paid its costs without damage. A family that had been assembled from the wreckage of a lie, slowly, imperfectly, one kept promise at a time. Malik turned the last page of the dessert menu and looked up. "Dad," he said. The word arrived in Kang Tae-jin's chest like a key turning in a lock he had forgotten the location of. "Yes," he said. "They have mango," Malik said. "I think that's the right choice." Tae-jin looked at the menu. He looked at his son. He felt something that did not have a name in any language he had been taught, and he did not try to name it because some things were better left as what they were, real, present, not requiring a label to exist. "Then that's what we'll have," he said. And the evening continued, unhurried, as evenings do when the people inside them have nowhere else they need to be.